Let me pull up the description.
What?
We're live.
I'm so excited for this fight.
See, we're boxing fans, and she boxes.
Wow. Yeah. Well, okay, I think we're live. Good morning, everyone, both in person and online listeners. This week we have pretty interesting and what I think will be an exciting topic for discussion, which is we will discuss what the moral and political responsibility is of revolutionaries in this 250th anniversary of the U.S. state. And vital to this discussion, which we sent over email, but you can look at it afterwards as well. Part of the discussion was also shaped by this speech by Martin Luther King Jr. that Doc had shared with us, which is his 1957 speech, Birth of a New Nation, which is about the independence of Ghana and Kwame Nkrumah, the Independence Day ceremony of which King actually attended.
Yes.
And this is only 2 years after the Montgomery bus boycott as well. So it's like early in both the life of King, early in the movement. And so Doc is going to begin the discussion, and I think it'll be a really interesting discussion for all of us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Emily, and good morning to everybody. And I don't know where everybody else is. I know where some people are, but welcome back, Jerry, from Korea. And I'm certain you got a lot of insights looking at America from Asia. I'm certain, But just about the speech, The Birth of a New Nation by Martin Luther King, given in 1957, it shatters many of the myths about King as some sort of moderate, naive integrationist. This was in 1957, and he talks about the independence of Ghana, the first African nation to achieve independence from colonialism. The two other nations on the African continent, Liberia and Ethiopia, had never been directly colonized. You could say that Liberia was a neo-colony of the United States going back to the 1830s. But certainly Ethiopia had waged successive wars, the most important being against the Italians in 1890, I think 95 or 96. So Ethiopia has always fought for its independence and its civilization. But Ghana was the first of the colonized African nations to achieve independence, and Martin Luther King, along with other African Americans and the Vice President of the United States, who was then Richard Nixon, attended the independence of Ghana. And King speaks in the deepest, most radical ways about the anti-colonial struggle and its relationship to the U.S. Black People's Freedom Movement. And I just want to say it shatters so many of the myths, including in 1966 when Stokely Carmichael proclaims Black Power as a kind of radical repositioning of a part of the civil rights movement against King. This is very, very important. And when Stokely, who then became Kwame Ture, talks about this, he talks about it as though he and those in SNCC were forcing King's hand to a more radical position on Vietnam and on poverty. You listen to this speech. It is a unbelievable document in understanding his history. But just to go quickly, any discussion that we have these days must begin with a context. And of course, the context is the context of crisis, the crisis of war and defeat, and the crisis of economic decline and impoverishment of the people. And I don't think we can underestimate this process, the deepening processes of the impoverishment of the people, which unites the people in ways that they never thought they would be united. Reflective of this is a Pew Research poll that was recently published, showing that only 17% of the American people say that the government, they can trust the government to do the right thing. Only 17%. Of that 17%, only 2% say they can always trust the government to do the right thing. And the other 15% say most of the time they can trust the government. Only a year ago, as bad as the 17% is, 22%, only 22% said they can trust the government. So the government is reaching a point where none of the people, certainly working people, lower middle class people, and the poor, probably it's something like 100%, does not trust the government to do the right thing. Which raises a question that we always talk about. How can a government govern without substantial support of the people? When you look at this kind of polling, which is just the latest of many polls that we have talked about over the years, where 75 to 80% say the country is going in the wrong direction. 60% of the people before the war with Iran began opposed this war. Richard Haas, who is the former president of the
Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on
Relations, forgive me. Now he's emeritus of that. Said a couple of years ago, and you just can't take lightly when these important figures within the state speak. He said that it's neither China or Russia that provide the greatest security risks to the United States. It is the American people. And he was right. Moreover, when key ideologues within the state, and you remember, we talk about the crisis of the state as an ideological crisis of the state. So in other words, we're not just talking about an amorphous structure that's in crisis. We're talking about the people who define, shape, and conceptualize the purpose of the state are now in literally a conflict or a war over the direction of the American empire and hence the American state. And therefore, when Robert Kagan, I keep mentioning him, says that the Trump administration has two options, either to surrender or to escalate this war. It seems to me, now people have different interpretations of what he was saying. It seems to me that Robert Kagan was admitting defeat. And this, for Robert Kagan, let's be clear, this has never been in his political DNA. This is not him. The neocons don't admit defeat. Defeat was not a possibility. This is why we keep going back to this 35 years ago, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the triumphalism, that now it is a unipolar world. The American empire will and dominate all other, quote, powers, all of this. The stuff that you all grew up on. Now the interesting thing is you all missed the defeat in Vietnam. And one of the things I try to say is to understand the triumphalism around the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the myth that they did it, when in fact it was forces within the Soviet Union. I want to underline this, forces within the Soviet Union who became enemies of the Soviet state, beginning with Gorbachev. That sounds, they try to present him in the West, and a guy that I like a lot these days, Jeffrey Sachs, tries, I like what he's saying, and we'll come back to him. But, he wants to say Gorbachev is the greatest statesman of the 20th century, or the second half of the 20th century, when in fact, Gorbachev was an enemy of his own people and of his own nation. And most Russians, most people who were part of the Soviet Union before it was disintegrated, see Gorbachev as an enemy. And he was. There's no two ways to get around it. But nonetheless, a hegemon that had lost 18 years earlier in Vietnam would take any victory they could get. Does that make sense? And this was a big victory. So they lost in Vietnam, so let's forget about that. But we won the Cold War kind of thing. Now, 35 years later, they're faced with a defeat greater than the defeat in Vietnam. The consequences of this are far more than that. But more than anything, the domestic consequences of this. I recall of this defeat in Iran. I recall at the end of Vietnam, the ruling elites were pessimistic. Mm-hmm. And it's good to be able to see them squirm and so on. Very pessimistic. What happens to the American military? What happens to our ability, as they would say, to project power? What does it mean when nations, especially in the global South, are not afraid of us any longer? All of these things. How else can white supremacists deal with defeat? They go into a kind of a fetal position. And I think we're going to see that fetal position return. Just pay close attention to it. And, it's an enjoyable thing to watch, people who marched around the world threatening people now in a fetal position, not wanting to come out of the house and drunk all the time. And that's what it's going to be. But when a Robert Kagan speaks, it means more than a John Mearsheimer or Robert Papp or even a Jeffrey Sachs, because Kagan is at the center of the state. Mm-hmm. But then there was, when Trump is trying to get out of this war, and perhaps I'm saying what you all know already, there was an immediate blowback or pushback against him by his so-called allies. Ted Cruz of Texas, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, these huge defenders of the American empire. But Trump is in a dilemma. Mm-hmm. If he escalates, and this is the Robert Papp thing, an escalatory trap, what are you going to do, send troops in there? And then body bags start coming home, and the price of oil goes to $10 a gallon in California, and something similar on the East Coast, not to mention the Midwest, and people can't afford food, and inflation. which is always an attack upon working people first and primarily, gets out of control. So he will escalate, but cannot win. Iran has proven that. And this is spectacular. But then he will be defeated time and again at home. And as they say, the knives will be brought out. And no one at the elite level will be safe. And I do mean this, the knives will be brought out. We kind of saw that with the John F. Kennedy assassination. It came not too much longer than a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and 2 years after the Bay of Pigs. People don't understand that Cuban Missile Crisis. Curtis LeMay and the Air Force wanted not a deal with the Soviet Union, and the deal was that the Soviet Union would take its missiles out of Cuba, and in return, the United States would take its missiles out of Turkey. You see, they didn't want a deal. They wanted to bomb Cuba, as they say, back to the Stone Age, as a way of sending a message to the Soviet Union. And because they saw Kennedy, and here again, I'm speculating, so much of that assassination remains in the area of, we don't have the information. This whole idea of one man did it is an absurdity to begin with. But Kennedy was killed over the question of Cuba, of dealing with the Soviet Union militarily, and of bombing Cuba into the Stone Age.
And Checkpoint Alpha. Do you remember Checkpoint Alpha?
I don't.
The checkpoint in Germany, and when they divided East and West Germany.
Yes.
And the American tanks were pointed at Soviet tanks for
Yes.
I think up to 24 hours, maybe more.
Oh, no question. Oh, there is no question. So, the Iron Curtain as, oh, yes. Go,
So
I'm sorry.
Kennedy taking a step back from the Iron Curtain.
That's right. And that, interestingly, Kennedy was seen as an appeaser of the Soviet Union because he wanted peaceful coexistence and demilitarization, including the demilitarizing of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is what was behind his assassination. And it is not dissimilar to what Trump is looking at.
Interesting.
I'm not going to say more. This is the context that we live in. But a lot of what I'm going to say is very much built upon and influenced by, I think, 2 free schools ago, which I encourage everybody to read, look at, or listen to on Spotify, which Spotify is very good because somehow AI has integrated into Spotify, and it breaks down the free school discussion into chapters, which are very, would you think they're good, Samir?
It's better than nothing.
Yeah. Look, I mean, this I have to give it to AI. It's a good job. But that discussion, studying the Birmingham movement, was very important. Alice, Kathy, and Emily, and I thought it helped us to break new ground in our understanding of what the fight in this time might look like. It's interesting that outside of the free school, no one feels it's necessary to study the Birmingham movement, the movement where both James Lawson and Martin Luther King say the civil rights movement began. Because for the first time, we had masses of people willing to go to jail. And that was ultimately the strategy, not to just get a few people going to jail, but in various campaigns to fill up jails where there wouldn't be even enough room. The other thing is the enlisting of children. And this was very important and a high point and something that has to be studied further. And the debates in Birmingham about, and Alice brought this out in her presentation, of should we let children go to jail? Would this damage them for life? Would this be a stain upon their academic records, etc.? And King, Shuttlesworth said, well, if they can make a decision to be baptized and give their lives to Christ, they can make a decision to go to jail. And King, how did King say it, Alice, when he justified the children? He said something, do you recall?
No, I think he agreed with the sentiment.
He agreed with it.
And that he had gone to jail so many times,
yes,
and that was a transformative process
yes,
too.
Yes.
And then, yeah.
I think, and also at the essence of King's argument is that the moral maturing of the children would be through these experiences. And that's something I think we should hold on to, that the children would experience something that would lead to their moral development. Which then brings us to the question of Birmingham, the merging of moral questions with the questions of freedom. Or to put it another way, the moral foundations of a political struggle. What are they? And if a movement prioritized the moral conditions of that struggle, were we not then seeing the emergence of a movement of a new type, a freedom movement of a new type? And had not King's understanding of this been rooted in his understanding of the anti-colonial struggle in Africa and India? Was Birmingham a new stage in King's understanding of both the moral conditions of struggle and the struggle itself? Or to put it another way, it seems that King had come to the conclusion that a mid-20th century struggle, with all that had preceded it, including World Wars I and World War II, including the Indian independence movement and the Chinese Revolution, and the African independence movements, had King come to a new synthesis. Morality was indispensable to the struggle for freedom, and that love was a conditionality of the unity of the people. Without saying it, I am convinced that King believed that if the freedom movement did not put love at its foundation, if it said we must hate our opponents, would that hate not then infect the movement for freedom itself? In other words, let us take, for example, the psychological theories of Frantz Fanon, that hate was a necessary condition of freeing the enslaved and colonized from the submissiveness and privileging of the oppressor. Was the submerged hatred not necessary to free the oppressed to fight for freedom? Okay. King takes the opposite position. That you start on a foundation, let us say, of hating your opposition. That hate will come back to infect the movement itself. So by putting the movement on a certain moral level, it guaranteed the possibility of a certain development of the freedom movement itself. Didn't make inevitable anything, but it was a way of suggesting a freedom movement of a new type, a freedom movement with different conditionalities than the national liberation movements of Asian Africa generally had. Birmingham was where all of this came together. There were three things that we could see in Birmingham. First of all, the maturing in the evolution of a revolutionary corps. We saw them in their fullest development. They were more developed than in Montgomery, than in Albany, than at any other time. They were a collective. Small though they be, they constituted a revolutionary corps. And once we see them, we have a better understanding of the type of leadership they gave. Let me just make another point, because this is totally gotten wrong. I know we're supposed to go to see Chris Small on Tuesday. I kind of want to. And then again, I kind of don't want to, because I don't want to hear the noise, because I know he doesn't get it right, you know? But I could be wrong, and I'm going to go, I think. Talk without an understanding of a period of revolutionary struggle in your own history is empty and just noise. Because you don't speak from a historical understanding of anything. If you're a trade union leader, trade unionism took a great leap forward as a result of the Black freedom movement. That's number one. The other thing is they failed to be able to understand how a revolutionary corps could lead a civil rights movement. They make the wrong assumption that the fight for civil rights had to be led by men and women who saw the end of the struggle as civil rights and not freedom. That is a huge mistake. Does that make sense the way I put it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You see, let me put it this way, Shantu. I'll put it as a question. Can revolutionaries lead a struggle for reform of the legal system and the legal position of Black people? In other words, can revolutionaries lead a civil rights movement? Or must those who were leading the civil rights movement, must they have seen civil rights as the end and not freedom? I know I'm not being clear.
Yeah.
You see, this is where Stokely Carmichael makes a huge mistake,
Right.
because he assumed that he was a revolutionary and King was a, quote, mere civil rights leader. When in fact, well, that was his own, let me say, I knew him, we were good friends. So it's not that I'm trying to put nobody down. In fact, he gave me, he gave me the name Tough Tony. He gave me that name, although it didn't stick. You know what I'm saying? But
And then Kathy gave you the name of Tender Tony.
that didn't stick either. Because I reject both names and both labels. But no, I'm not saying this because I don't. And I dug Stokely. I loved him, man. Great guy, beautiful. I mean, just really a fun person, as you could see, and a drama, of course. And but he assumed that SNCC was the center of the Revolutionary Corps. Our reading is that SCLC and some SNCC people and some Corps members and others was the center, the Revolutionary Center. And what demonstrated this was Birmingham. And the promise of Birmingham. And perhaps the ruling elite understood Birmingham better than many of those who were part of the civil rights movement or even a part of Birmingham. They understood what that potential was and how it then elevates King and Shuttlesworth and Coretta and Diane Nash and all in that core, that tight core, elevates them to a level never seen by Black leadership. It was Birmingham, not Montgomery. Although Montgomery begins a trajectory, it is Birmingham where it is crystallized. And thus, you know, when A. Philip Randolph makes a call for a march on Washington, the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, it is the energy that comes from Birmingham that makes that turnout possible, where tens of thousands of people saw victory in sight. And they did. Even if it meant a Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, they saw victory. But it was Birmingham. Now, as a result of this, the machinations in the organization of the March on Washington led to this whole thing. Oh, we want King to be the last speaker. Why did they want King to be the last speaker? Because they were hoping that everybody would leave by the time King spoke. But what happened is that everybody stayed because they wanted to hear King. King had thus become a revolutionary leader, the likes of which this country has never seen. And, you know, when Law's still trying to understand King, I'm still trying to understand King. And that is what the free schools are. We're still trying to understand King. And he is this complex, almost transcendent revolutionary figure. But you get a better handle on him if you see him as a revolutionary figure. You know, you can begin to understand him better. And if you see Birmingham as that place, and then of course the letter from a Birmingham jail, where he says to the opposition, you know, many people, pardon me if this is parenthetically, misunderstand King because they misunderstand his mode of talking and engagement. For example, he does not go head on and just dismiss the moderate, the white moderate. And by the way, it's so interesting the strategy of the letter because there were blacks that agreed with the white moderates, a lot of blacks. Maybe more black preachers agreed with the white moderates than agreed with King. Yeah. But the argument was of the white moderate. And he makes the claim, very, very important claim. And this is a revolutionary claim. I see the white moderate as more dangerous to this struggle than the Ku Klux Klan. Mm-hmm. And what he was saying is because, and I'll use this, because the white moderate speaks out of both sides of his mouth, says he's for you, but opposes everything you do to fight. The other part of that, and I wish, and this is every revolutionary must fight for his or her position to lead the masses. You're not a revolutionary because you sit on the side talking SHIT. You fight for leadership. Interesting. What the white moderates were saying is that the revolutionaries were outside agitators, that you had no authority to claim leadership of the masses of Birmingham. And what King successfully does is make the argument that who better than we have the authority to lead the people, even if I am from Atlanta, you know. This is a huge claim. The claim that the civil rights movement can and is best led by revolutionaries. That's what he was saying. And then he undercuts the claim of the white moderate, all of whom are religious leaders, to moral authority. This is huge. Emily, me and Emily, I guess, Alistair, we've been talking about the 4th of July and the reading of the Declaration at the statue of Richard Allen, and then having something afterwards. And maybe it would be valuable or useful to look in depth at the letter from a Birmingham jail. Mm-hmm. He undercuts, he says that morality is not what you say, it's what you do. What is the criteria of morality? It is what you do, not what you say. So he's setting a standard. So I just want to say that Birmingham, that's the evolution and consolidation of a revolutionary. Even in the core, there are different levels. Of course, I put King at the leader. King is the leader, of course. But Shuttlesworth is deeply committed. I think Wyatt T. Walker, deeply committed. I think Andy Young is deeply committed, as things will show as we went forward. But the revolutionary is crystallized around this revolutionary genius, Martin Luther King Jr. He is the indispensable factor. But King had evolved. He had always been a radical. Crozier was a radical. He was an anti-fascist. The concept of the fierce urgency was a reflection upon the failure of the Catholic and Protestant churches in Germany to act, and thus the rise of Hitler. 1955 to 56, the Montgomery movement, he saw the capacity of the masses. This is very important. And of course, 1957, the year that SCLC is formed, is the year that King goes to Ghana and gives this, very important speech called The Birth of a New Nation. And then, of course, 1961, we're at the National Baptist Convention. Forces of SCLC attempt to take leadership of the National Baptist Convention and thus deploy it in the struggle for freedom. That would have meant more. I mean, it would have been a astounding victory. They were not victorious, but the struggle, though they lost it, would resonate for many years, as we've talked about here in Philadelphia with Leon Sullivan, with Lorenzo Shepard, in particular, as these hardcore civil rights activists in the pulpit. And then eventually Birmingham. And by the way, let's not forget, they go to Birmingham recognizing that there was a defeat in Albany. So this is now existential. If they're defeated in Birmingham, then other more, quote, moderate Black leaders would have made the claim to leadership. If the Revolutionary Corps, now you can understand it as a revolutionary group, if they were to in life support the claim that they should lead this freedom movement, they had to win in Birmingham. They could not lose in Birmingham. So it was all out in Birmingham. And Wyatt T. Walker, as the general of this movement, is a very important figure. And then there were others who came, and of course Bevel, but it was Wyatt Walker. And the calculation that King and those had to make. What's the best way to use me, or the best way to use King? Should I go to jail now, or should I be used for fundraising? Mm-hmm. And then he makes a decision, going to jail. This is revolutionary calculation. Looking at the on-the-ground situation, looking at the opposition. They had to take into account that Birmingham had just elected a quote, white moderate segregationist. Should we negotiate or should we fight? They had to decide that. But everything was on the line in Birmingham. Second point, an appeal to the grassroots across the board, adults, youth, and children, to deploy the entire of the Black community in this fight. It was a now or never battle. That's why the question of if the adults are hesitant, let us deploy children against them, against the segregationists. It was that all or nothing battle. And it's not unusual, even in military struggles of national liberation fights. Sometimes you have to deploy youth and children in the fight. And then finally, resolves once and for all the condition of love, but love connected to power, which is, of course, forgotten these days. to make concrete in the throes of a revolutionary struggle by revolutionaries of what love is and how it must be connected to power. So we're talking about something deeper and broader. We're not any longer talking about agape. We're talking about a condition of struggle, a condition of the unity of the people, a condition that gives a healthiness and optimism to the people. Okay, I don't know. I'm not making that clear enough, but you get what I'm saying. So I just want to end on this. Could we not think of Philadelphia as a 21st century Birmingham? That is, we the free school. Think in these ways, in these terms. Does it not give a greater concreteness, a better focus to what we are doing and to the opposition to us? Well, of course, the 21st century is not the middle of the 20th century. So to say that Philadelphia could become a 21st century Birmingham is to say that Philadelphia has much of the potentiality of Birmingham. I see the free school, and I think we see ourselves much in the image of the SCLC, properly understood. Isn't that ironic? We don't see ourselves that much as SNCC, although most people in the free school are the ages of the SNCC workers. We see ourselves more in the image of the SCLC. We should, maybe explore that a little bit more. We, like in Birmingham, see the churches, the Black churches, as central. We see the possibility of the people to engage and to creatively engage a struggle ahead, which are different than the issues in Birmingham, but nonetheless of national consequence. And lastly, we have viewed King's philosophy of the moral foundations of politics and struggle, and at the heart of morality is love, which means that at the heart of politics and of morality is the people. Because only if one centralizes love is one centralizing the people. How do we know this? Just observe the way people respond to it. That has a great attractiveness. The possibility that a new state, a new democracy, devoid of the normal hatefulness that is generated by bourgeois relations of production in society, of white civilization, of war, to present in a compelling and convincing way, and I want to underline compelling and convincing, not just words, but words that we believe and that we will fight for and that we argue for. That love among and between the people is a condition of the power of the people. I'll stop there.
Well, I guess.
I'm just going to get a cup of coffee.
Well, I guess what I was going to say is, I feel that I've been going through a transformation myself because in coming to know King, because coming to the free school, the three figures that we hold high are Du Bois, Baldwin, and King. And I think in discovering or better understanding King, especially in the past couple of weeks, helped me realize actually that I think in the past I'd held Du Bois and Baldwin actually as higher or greater or more of a revolutionary than King. And I think I never really understood why that was. And until probably what you had said, which is like the method of engagement of King does not, if you don't truly understand actually King as a figure, you can see him as less revolutionary. Because his words are not to be provocative or provocative in the sense of just saying things for the sake or like using fancy language or that provokes the people. And I think it's really actually in the past couple of weeks where we've done this investigation or tried to start this deeper investigation of King that I am better coming to understand actually how much of a revolutionary he is. And how he needs to be properly understood to understand what we can do in our time or what is possible of revolutionaries in this time. And recently, I think because of it, because I can find myself now more interested actually in wanting to listen to King, wanting to listen to those interviews of people who talk about King. Whereas in the past, I think I would read in free school but then I was like, okay, cool. So recently I've been revisiting this documentary of King that free school has watched in the past, which is King in the Wilderness.
Oh, yeah.
And this specifically covers the last several years of King's life.
18 months.
18 months of King's life. And, but what I've also been watching are because in the documentary itself, they have clips of different interviews of people that were in SCLC, but also were in SNCC. So this includes individuals like Andrew Young, Dorothy Cotton, C.T. Vivian, Jeff Jackson, Diane Nash, so forth. And so there's separately the full interviews that were conducted with each of these individuals. And actually listening to him has kind of been helpful to supplement our reading of Taylor Branch. And I think some of the things that stood out is even when we talk about nonviolence, it helped me to clarify, like seeing the different local campaigns and how nonviolence was actually, like what nonviolence meant in these campaigns was helpful. Because in this, and I think largely what I will be saying is with the interview with C.T. Vivian, because that's most recent for me. And he was asked.
That's in the documentary.
So the documentary is like I think 2 hours,
Yes.
and then they have the full, like all the interviews are uploaded on YouTube, and I think each are like 2 hours long. But it's interesting because when C.T. Vivian is asked about Stokely Carmichael and the Black Power movement, it's almost not important to him in the sense that he was saying how King was incredibly patient with Stokely and understanding where Stokely was coming from and where the appeal of Black Power is coming from, given that you have Black folk who are oppressed, and oftentimes that leads to a certain desperation and turn towards violence. But when C.T. Vivian is talking about Stokely Carmichael, it's interesting because he kept emphasizing there are no victories. There's no victories with Black Power, meaning it's not just the talk, but actual changes in the lives of people, how the lives of people are improved. And he was saying with Black Power, there are no victories. And I'm still trying to understand that because I guess in that time, there are people who are drawn to Black Power, but he was saying it was with nonviolence that victories were achieved. It gave people a sense of optimism and hope. And I think this is a sidebar, is that you often see images of Stokely and he's next to Martin Luther King Jr. And the other thing CT Vivian was saying is that he had, in some ways, his rise was also in clinging on to Martin Luther King Jr. He didn't have the mass of people. It was only through walking with Martin Luther King Jr. that he had that platform. So that was one thing. Then the other thing, not with CT Vivian, this was with Ralph Abernathy. It was a separate interview, not part of King in the Wilderness, but the interview had asked him, what happens when nonviolence encounters nonviolence?
Mhm.
And nonviolence is used in different ways, but in terms of the nonviolence of SCLC and the nonviolence of authorities in a city like Albany, part of the failure of Albany is that the authorities had learned from the campaign of Montgomery and the previous ones as well, to know not to engage and not to essentially show displays of violence similar to Bull Connor, because in not being violent, then essentially the underlying white supremacy tensions could not surface. So in Albany, you had restaurants, you had the police commissioner that were not retaliating in response to the nonviolence. And so that example kind of also served as a contrast to how, when nonviolence actually engages with violence and in bringing forward the tensions of the city, of the state, how that essentially what was I trying to say?
Can I just say something? See, the Albany failure, and this is what Birmingham learned from Albany, that you heighten tensions in order to resolve them, and therefore the jailings, the soda fountain sit-ins, all of that, you heighten tension and you want a response from the segregationists. But in Albany, somehow the segregationists outmaneuvered the civil rights activists. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, and essentially the tension to surface the immorality of the existing authorities and state.
But in Albany, the authorities wouldn't go along with it.
Right.
Yeah. But in Birmingham, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
In Birmingham, it seemed the stakes were higher than in Albany for the segregationists. They drew a red line, and we will fight. As Wallace said, segregation now and segregation forever. They were going to fight in Birmingham, where in Albany they were not going to put up the same fight.
Yeah, they were hoping essentially it would just wash over.
That's right. Yes.
Wouldn't gain the support of the masses, wouldn't get the attention in the media to put pressure on the state. And the other thing, I guess, connected to that is I know we've also been having discussions of like the state level and the federal authorities and the implications, even going back to Reconstruction and in terms of states' rights versus federal intervention. Because what was part of these movements is also an understand, or I guess one thing that Abernathy also says is, to our point of how King was a revolutionary, especially when he speaks against the war, is that he's not just a civil rights leader, but also is one thinking about the power of the state and the authority of the state. And the way that Abernathy talks about this is that the movement was touching on the affairs of the state, particularly when it comes to war.
Yes.
And but even I guess, I don't know if this is exactly related, but essentially between the state and the federal government in the beginnings of the movement, where the implementation of the federal amendments fell upon these different states. And part of what the
But I just
movement,
make, just so we have it clear, when we say the state, here we're talking about the state governments and not the state that we've been talking about.
And the reason why I guess this is important, because in previous preschools, we've been talking about the state, and the state meaning not the state governments, but in terms of like, as revolutionaries and understanding like what makes up the state, especially in the American context of the Constitution, the amendments, what that relationship of revolutionaries to the state looks like. But in understanding the different complexities of the movement itself, where King and this Revolutionary Corps were working with all of these dimensions, the federal government with Kennedy and Johnson, and then also the local state authorities. And the reason why I guess that's important is also that they were strategists when they were thinking about what battles had to be fought in order to improve the conditions within different cities. They knew that there was the federal government, but then there's also the state authorities. And for the earlier campaigns, I think what Abernathy was saying is that the federal government was more of a friend, more one in which they were engaged and calling upon to protect the people in the various states where protections are not being provided. I think I'm losing my track here, but what was the other thing? There was one more thing. I'm losing my point.
No, but your point is just to be clear, they were working at these different levels of law and how the Constitution is interpreted, and what they were attempting, what King and those in Birmingham are thus confronting, is the concept of states' rights. That the Constitution is not to be interpreted from the standpoint of the federal government or the federal Supreme Court, but at the level of the states. So when it comes to the Constitution, the federal Constitution, the Supreme Court of Alabama takes precedent over the Supreme Court of the United States. And this is the doctrine of states' rights, or what they try to call federalism. By the way, even with the Civil Rights Movement, even with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, this question of states' rights has never been conceded by conservatives. And up to this day, and this rotten Supreme Court is a Supreme Court that believes in states' rights. And they are rotten and corrupt and so on, and criminal, to tell you the truth. So that battle, and that's why Wallace will stand in the schoolhouse door and say, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. You know what I'm saying? It is, unique Southern accent, because he is upholding states' rights as a constitutional principle, yada, yada, yada. It's deeper than deep. And if I could just say one other, thus, besides the crisis of race, all of these other crises are drawn into the crisis of race, including a constitutional crisis. And by the way, you can look at post-civil rights American history as a history of the nation is always on the precipice of a constitutional crisis. Now, of course, with war, there, who has the authority to make war, blah, blah, blah. But this in some ways is intersecting with the crisis of race and who has the authority to decide legally. When we say constitutional crisis, what is the law? What is the supreme law of the country saying? And just a small, you get, oh, he's a judge or she's a judge with a robe on and he loves his wife or she loves her husband. All that old nickel and dime espionage. Some of the most ruthless, hateful, anti-human forces. Hey, Emily, could you bring me a cup of coffee if you don't mind? Yeah, that you can ever imagine. So it is huge. And as you point out, yeah.
Oh, I just remembered the last thing, which is that this is also in the documentary as well, and also in the interviews, is how King becomes this unusual preacher, but then also leader of the people in the South. Or at least this is referring to his time in the South, is that C.T. Vivian was, I forget if it was C.T. Vivian or Andrew Young who had said this, which is that he had this unusual education from Proser, knew the different philosophers, and would often quote them as well. And I think the reason why this stands out is also an understanding today where because I forget whether it was C.T. Vivian or whether it was Andrew Young, they were saying that though he was unusual, the people were looking for an intellectual pulpit. And that's important for today because I think we ask this question as well, the same question today too, which is that what is the function of the church, or what is the function of the leadership of the church? Where, yes, I think we see value in terms of the organization, the community, the discipline. But at the same time, we also understand that there's something lacking in today's churches. And I guess what we're saying is that the people are looking for ideas. Or I guess that's a hypothesis that we have, that within the congregations that exist today, is that what people are looking for? And in listening to Andrew Young or C.T. Vivian talk about King as being this intellectual with this unique education that his father didn't, or even though his father was more educated, but his father did not have. And it was with King that the genius of King, that he was able to win over people. People would show up to see King and listen to King. And even among the revolutionary core that we referred to, is that it was kind of clear through these interviews that they were saying that King was ahead and ideologically, intellectually, and politically. And so I guess that was one thing too. And with the
No question about that.
Relationship to the masses too, which is that with people, you see, like in both the examples of the successes of the various campaigns, but then also the setbacks, where it is this strategy of nonviolence that ultimately is able to gain victories. Because when the Memphis strikes initially begun, King was not actually in Memphis. It had started, and then he's saying, I have to go to Memphis. And he goes to Memphis while the marches are happening.
Yeah.
But what happens in the initial stages is that actually violence breaks out. And violence breaks out, it becomes chaos, or essentially chaos in the community. And the leaders have to reassess, like, where do we go from here? But I guess I say that because it's both in Birmingham and then also seeing the different campaigns, whether it's Albany, whether it's like the beginnings in Memphis, that you see why it is this strategy that is one that makes the most gains for the people in terms of actually changing conditions for the people.
Can I say one thing, not just to add to what you said? See, when the masses lose trust for the pulpit, when they believe that a pulpit is for sale, in other words, any politician, any even Zionists could buy your pulpit, that the preacher is for sale, people lose trust. Even though for most of the civil rights period, King is not in a pulpit. He's not a preacher. He's assistant preacher at his father's church, Ebenezer, but he's not. So, but they trusted him. And why did they trust him? Where did that deep trust, even up to this day, a deep trust of King, is because of the moral imperative. They said if a man leads from the standpoint of doing good, if a man leads from the standpoint of doing no harm to even your enemies, people who oppose you, I'll put it that way. There's something in the way he could articulate, they trusted him. So C.T. Vivian and Abernathy are absolutely right about Stokely. He could speak, he was charismatic, but you didn't bring you nothing. Until in the end, Stokely moves to Africa, West Africa, Guinea, saying that the revolution will proceed from students in Africa. Now, if that's not a harebrained idea, you got to tell me what is. That was so much nonsense, it don't even make sense. That in other words, the people that did Montgomery and Birmingham and Memphis and yada, 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 well, they don't have the revolutionary intelligence that the Africans have. Afrocentricity, that Black people need to recenter themselves in their African values. What are you talking about? So therefore, any African you can find in Africa, bring him over here to teach us, we Afro-Americans, how you know where we saw that? In the Church of the Overcomer. Remember that so-called bishop from Africa? If that wasn't a fraud, bricks ain't groceries. A hustler. You understand? I'm sorry, yo. But why do we, who have led this historic struggle and still have the potential to lead another one, why should we be beholding to, quote, Africans, many of whom are nothing more than neo-colonial hustlers? Why? I've never been convinced of it. You say, well, change your name to an African name. That make you more real. No, it don't. It means you just change your name. So what? I could put on a dashiki, but that don't make you a revolution. But y'all see where I'm coming from. And this is why, but see that whole movement after the assassination of King, let me just, if I'm talking too much, shut me up. See, y'all see this, quote, Afrocentricity and blacker than black kind of thing. I'm the real Black person, you understand? Because I got an African name. You dig what I'm saying? And you ain't yet there kind of vibe. This is a kind, and it rose as a denunciation of King and the civil rights movement. When the question becomes, what is blackness? Who is blacker than who? And therefore, the quote, blackest among us have the authority to speak for us. That's the whole That's the architecture, the whole thing. You understand? And so it is a redividing of Black people up based upon cultural preference, but even more than that, based upon phenotype. Who is the more Black? The one with the most melanin. So the blacker you are, the more Black you are. But physically Black, the more Black you are. You know, this has been devastating in many ways to Black communities and to the Black community. But it is an old game played by the slave owners to divide the field Negro from the house Negro, the light-skinned Negro from the dark-skinned Negro. You understand? And that's why Du Bois said, well, look at here. Ain't no more than about 20% of us pure Africans. You know what I'm saying? Most of us are assimilated. We got the blood of Africa, the blood of Europe, the blood of Native America, all that up in us. So if you define us phenotypically, so, you know, the white man made a big mistake with the one drop rule. See, the one drop rule said all you, if you went back 4 generations and there's a Black person in your family, you Black. So Black people said, well, right on, unite then. You know what I'm saying? That was a big mistake the white man made back in his days. But to revisit that under the slogans of Garvey and to deploy Garvey against Du Bois and against King is an ideological crime against the struggle for Black freedom. The devastation we have not yet fully assessed. And a lot of young Black people are in this wilderness of not knowing how to work their way out from this. I'm sorry, Jerry.
Well, yeah, I wanted to say first, it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good. You look good, man.
But while people were talking, I was looking back at Why I Can't Wait, which is King's book about the Birmingham campaign. And he specifically started talking about like what he calls the revolution in 1963. And this may sound kind of not the most relevant, but or just kind of funny. But if you do a search of Why We Can't Wait versus Stride Towards Freedom, which is the Montgomery book.
Yes.
In Stride Towards Freedom, the first book, King rarely uses the word revolution.
Yeah.
He uses it like twice. I looked it up in the ebook. So this, I don't know, take it for what you will. In Why We Can't Wait, he's using the word revolution constantly. He uses it dozens of times throughout the book. And I think I agree with you all that is a reflection of that moment of the campaign of Birmingham, representing something very decisive for King even. And I think reflecting on what is it that defines King's revolutionary genius is, on the one hand, what Doc brought up and said about King's kind of unyielding determination and commitment to his vision of freedom, which was the revolutionary vision of freedom. And I think the other side of it was, it's almost like his commitment to nonviolence, it's almost like it is part of what propels him towards not just that vision of like the future and all that, but it's also what propels what I think is the other side of King's genius, which is his understanding of the people and his ability to see the people clearly. And it's in the second chapter of Why We Can't Wait, where he talks, which is titled "Nonviolence: The Sword That Heals," where he, he's talking about the Albany campaign, which Alice discussed, and he talked about this question that you brought up of filling the jails. And he says that in Albany, actually, about 5% of the entire Black population in the city were willing to go to jail. And he says, if you don't mind, I'll read like a can produce from its ranks even 5% who will voluntarily go to jail for a just cause, then surely nothing can thwart its ultimate triumph. If, however, the detractors of nonviolence fell into error by magnifying the temporary setbacks into a catastrophic defeat, then the adherents of the new theory of nonviolence must also avoid exaggerating its powers. And so he says, when we speak of filling the jails, we are talking of a tactic, a strategy to be flexibly applied. No responsible person would promise to fill all jails everywhere at any time. Leaders indulge in bombast if they do not take all circumstances into account before calling upon their people to make a maximum sacrifice. Filling jails means that thousands of people must leave their jobs, perhaps to lose them. They must put off their responsibilities. They must undergo harrowing psychological experiences for which law-abiding people are. The miracle of nonviolence lies in the degree to which people will suffer under its inspiration when the call is based on judgment. And he says, Negroes are human, not superhuman. Kind of reminds me of Du Bois. He says, like all people, they have different personalities, differing financial interests, and varied aspirations. There are some Negroes who will never fight for freedom. There are Negroes who will seek profit for themselves alone from the struggle. There are even some Negroes who will cooperate with their oppressors. And he says, these facts should distress no one. Every minority and every people has its share of opportunists, profiteers, freeloaders, and escapists. The hammer blows of discrimination, poverty, and segregation must warp and corrupt some. No one can pretend that because a people may be oppressed, that every individual of that group is virtuous and worthy. But he says, the real issue is whether in the great mass, the dominant characteristics are decency, honor, and courage. And he says, in 1963 with Birmingham, once again, life was proof that Negroes had their heroes, their masses of decent people, along with their lost souls. The doubts that millions had felt as to the efficacy of the nonviolent way were dissolved. And the Negroes saw that by proving the sweeping and majestic power of nonviolence to bring about the beloved community, it might be possible for him to set an example to a whole world caught up in conflict. And I just bring that up because I feel like we've talked about it before, but there's like almost that sociological dimension of King, which is so often not really understood or talked about. And his ability, basically, in the ways that we've talked about, his ability to assess the moral capacity of the people to struggle.
That's a great point.
And
Yes.
and that he's motivated towards that knowledge by his revolutionary commitment. And that if King did not have that revolutionary commitment, he wouldn't even be able to see that dimension, that aspect of the capacity of Black people and of the American people as a whole. And and I think the other side of it too, which I'm not sure if you guys talked about when I wasn't here 2 weeks ago, but I think even that, like the other aspect of like that kind of revolutionary genius for King that I pick up from the Birmingham campaign compared to Albany is, I think it's very important that the revolutionary movement is able to pick and choose where to wage the battles. And I think in some ways, part of what makes Birmingham work is that they chose deliberately a city that had such a reactionary government.
Absolutely.
As compared to maybe Albany, where like even if it was segregationists, like there were basically more intelligent people in power. Whereas like I feel like part of the movement going to like choosing Birmingham is that they were able to choose a city that was governed by such a reactionary and like Alice said, such a violent, like so compulsively violent elite and kind of state apparatus like around Jim Crow. And yeah, so I feel like all of that is very important. And the last thing I want to say is I don't know if we shared this earlier, but after we did the April event on King, a few of us went to, I think it was Emily and Kathy and me, we went to the United House of prayer in South Philly, and we had a conversation with Apostle Crawford there. And we were talking with him and asked him what he thought of the town hall discussion that he had sit in for part of it. And he really liked it. He really enjoyed the discussion. He thought it was very eye-opening. And but he also said he felt like something was missing. And you can correct me if I'm not phrasing it the right way, but what he kind of was saying that what he felt was missing was, it's almost like in this time, before you can even get, he was like, well, it's almost like before you can even get to the kind of overt political demands, he's like, you have to address the deeper crisis, which is basically, in his words, the crisis of isolation of people, the crisis of alienation of people. And he was like, we look to the United House of Prayer as one of the kind of brighter, shining examples of the ability of Black people to maintain a sense of social cohesion and togetherness in the face of what has been like an actual counter-revolution in American society. But he was like, even he's like, I struggle, we struggle. We don't have it fully figured out. And he talked about like COVID, the pandemic, as one example. And I think part of what I've been thinking about, even coming back to the States, and this question of what would a revolutionary struggle in the city of Philadelphia look like?
Yep.
With the same level of zeal and vision and revolutionary commitment that we are trying to uphold and remain true to, is, I think, and this kind of goes back to conversations that we've had for the past couple of months, but I think there is a dimension to which we have to be able to understand in the deepest sense, like what are the people going through? And what is the call that will actually best be able to, in that way, like there's a way that Harry Belafonte phrases it, where he's like, King was able to bring the people into the making of their own history. And I think part of it is, yeah, like being able to understand, like, part of the paradox of this moment is, and maybe this is, I don't know if this is different even from the 60s, but part of like the paradox of this moment is like, in America, the tensions are already so there. They're already like staring everybody in the face in a way that I think was not, it's almost like the movement back in the day had to bring up there. Everyone assumed basically that like Black people were basically more passive and kind of accepted segregation as such. And I think part of what we are dealing with right now is those, it may not even be the exact same tensions, but like those tensions I feel like are everywhere. And it's like, that's like when, even coming back to the States, it like hits you in the face. It's like there's like all of this poverty, all of these homeless people, all these mentally ill people, which I know that we are kind of accustomed to and kind of grown numb to, but it's like, it's not normal. Like, it's really not normal. If you go to other places in the world, like even a place like South Korea, like it's so strange and jarring to come back into a society like this. And so in that sense, like to me, it's kind of more of an open question, but I think part of the revolutionary work has to be even better understanding, like, where are the people at? And what is the kind of demand that can be put forward that will best position the people to be able to struggle in this time. And I don't know, I really feel like part of it is like, if we think about like, what is it that the people are looking for, which Al has raised, I agree. Part of it is people are looking for ideas, but in a way it's like, in a larger sense, maybe what Americans in general are looking for is like basically their own humanity, which has been denied to them, which has been stripped from them. And I think any sense of revolutionary strategy in this century has to be, I think, predicated on a strategy that best enables the American people to reclaim their own humanity. And not in a kind of liberal way, a kind of abstract or vague way, but in a sense of, yeah, part of the humanity that has been denied to people is, in part, the struggle of ideas and the struggle of politics and of real politics. And I think that there are signs of that. Like part of my this is the last thing. The part of my working assumption about America right now is that I assume that out there in this country, there are like millions of people who are going around thinking all the time, thinking about what's happening, are deeply anxious and worried and angry and upset, and sometimes despairing about what's happening. And I think there has to be a way to be able to bring those people out into the open. Yeah, so those are, I guess, like partially a response to what you guys are saying, but also just reflections on coming back.
Part of what you say about Birmingham, because like it was so interesting the way Doc proposed what would it mean for us to even just say, could Philadelphia be a 21st century Birmingham? Which to a certain extent, like there's a part of me that's a little skeptical, right? Where I'm like, well, what gives us the right to make that type of assessment? Where I'm like, what's the difference between like actually Philly versus, let's say, Chicago? But then to a certain extent, you have to take it seriously because only the future can guarantee, only the future looking back at history, which is for us now, can you be like, oh, it turns out Philadelphia was 21st century Birmingham. But as revolutionaries, you must believe that Philadelphia, everyone must treat your city, your people as 21st century Birmingham. That is the revolutionary choice. But actually, in terms of like doing an actual assessment, what you were saying, Jeremiah, about what Jeremiah and Alice were bringing up about Birmingham is part of it is Birmingham, unlike Albany is a relatively rural city. So Albany did not have much industry. And like when we were reading Taylor Branch, well, these were the unread chapters for Taylor Branch, but Albany is the people, the Black folk they were enlisting were mainly farmers. They were not, it was because most of the industry in the area, it was farming land. And that's part of it. And like there were some people willing to go to jail. There were people willing to suffer great violence, including death, even just registering to vote. But Birmingham is different. Birmingham is the Pittsburgh of the South. Birmingham was a steel city. Because it is a steel city, it also it made a lot of white people rich. You had businesses, you had centers of education, and that's also why you got an intelligent ruling elite. Like you had a certain level of politicians, elites, but at the same time, we shouldn't forget that it also produces a type of Black proletariat. It is not coincidental that Sun Ra emerges from Steel City, the Magic City. Like someone like Sun Ra also comes from Birmingham. And and some of it is like, so it's Philadelphia. I mean, it is interesting to like start talking like this so concretely because in some ways it does kind of change the way we assess our own work or the way we see ourselves in the sense that breaking down, before I go into that, I guess I just wanted to like really agree with what Jeremiah you were bringing up and Doc, what you laid down. There's something very deep about understanding King's ideological trajectory, his trajectory as a revolutionary leader. Because you do, in 1955, with Montgomery bus boycott, like it was amazing to me when I realized that he never even brought up the concept of nonviolence, which for him was a revolutionary strategy, a revolutionary choice to see it as a strategy. Him in 1955, he's still using the Christian love, right? It's only later maybe later in 1955, maybe 1956, where he writes In Pilgrimage to Nonviolence and Stride Toward Freedom, which was published in 1956. He says, he was like, in trying to understand what happened in the Montgomery bus boycott, only to understand what we were really doing, it was not in the Western canon of thought. I had to go to the East. he was really saying is not just Eastern philosophy. He's talking about the Afro-Asiatic anti-colonial struggles. The only way to understand us as a people struggle. It could not be understood by the French Revolution. It cannot be understood by the German workers' uprisings. It cannot be understood by the British working class. It could only be understood what we are doing if you took seriously the Indian anti-colonial struggle. We are just like the Indian people fighting for freedom, and that itself is a revolutionary formulation. Like pilgrimage to violence in 1956 is a revolutionary proclamation. The thing that I found really deep in what you said, Doc, is letter from a Birmingham jail as a child. For me, I don't know what other people experienced in like your schools. I always had a negative impression of letter from a Birmingham jail, because that was the one piece of work to me in my like looking back as reflecting. That was the like #1 speech that was fed to you. That was the March on Washington. It's fed to you like a liberal, a very liberal passive speech. It's kind of amazing because when you actually read letter from a Birmingham jail, it's like super. You have to read it the right way.
You have to unlock it.
You have to unlock it, because letter from a Birmingham jail actually, like, the quote that everyone quotes from is like, an injustice anywhere is an injustice. But I don't know why or how it happens completely, but I always grew up with the impression that letter from a Birmingham jail of all of King's speeches was the most liberal, washed down. Isn't that interesting?
It's so interesting.
But actually the thing that was really deep is the way that, like, the way you even framed it is very like helpful in terms of being able to see King in letter from a Birmingham jail is him fighting for leadership. That he, as a revolutionary, on behalf of that revolution, they're fighting for the authority. They're fighting for the authority to lead the masses.
That's right.
And when you read letter from Birmingham jail, he's going through multiple different approaches, and then ultimately ends up with the largest, most important approach, which is to make the moral statement. Like not only legally, not only tactically, our leadership, but morally, we have the right vision. Morally, we have the moral vision. We have the correct, urgent analysis, and we have the revolutionary strategy. That is the case he's making in letter from a Birmingham jail. It is him undermining the authority of the white moderate and all those who support the white moderate, and he is asserting what, like, for me, I'll describe it. She said, like, think about right now as Mao's phrase, let 100 flowers bloom,
1,000 schools content.
and 1,000 schools content.
Let 1,000 flowers bloom in 100 schools.
Yes, let 1,000 flowers bloom in 100 schools of thought content.
Yeah.
In free school, our task as a revolutionary is to put forward the most beautiful, bright flower for the people. The people, at the end of the day, the people will be free. That is genuinely how I feel. It's how I think the Palestinian people feel. I think that is how any oppressed people feel. Anyone who is on the side of the oppressed feels. But we, as a revolutionary core, as a people who spend every week thinking, analyzing, finding clarity, and not just defining the crisis today, but what could be a path forward. What is the path forward, like Baldwin says, that could minimize the damage on children? Like, that is our most beautiful flower. Our task is like, I'm sure there are lots of flowers that people could choose from, and the people are entitled to choose whatever flower they feel leads them to freedom. But we are trying to put forward the most beautiful flower as an option for the people to choose. Like, that is, and like, that's how I see it. And I mean, that is, and I think that is King. Like King, they were saying, it was to see the letter from the Birmingham jail as a proclamation of like, this is our authority to lead the people.
This is very important.
And I think,
and to see the letter as a revolutionary proclamation.
Yeah.
Not only that we have the right, but we must lead.
Yes, we must lead.
This is, I'm sorry.
No, and I mean, that's a total game changer. The way you laid it out is actually a total game changer to me. And it also and then also the way you connect it to Stokely.
But can I just say on that chapter, the sword that heals, he says it is love that is the sword that heals. This is very important, but I stopped it. But this concept, which I get from your research, Emily, about love and power.
Right.
But if you introduce into that the sword that heals,
Yes.
you know, it's not just love, it's then the sword that heals. But I just, yeah, I just
Yeah,
wanted to
I
say-
think, well, because the way I see it is, even in terms of the beautiful flower that we are presenting, I think this is how. I don't know if
Do you see us as a flower or a school? Because he says, let 1,000 flowers bloom and 100 schools contend.
both. We're a school that I don't know. I get attached to nature. To me, yeah. Yes, we're a school
And it's
of
that
thought.
time of the year.
Yeah, it's that time of the year. But I do think the way I see it is that in a society so defined by ideological chains of division,
Yes.
meant to prevent people from, for example, what you started out with, never before perhaps in American history are the people suffering on a certain level that they could possibly understand. You always said someone in Butler could know someone in North Philly, but they have not met each other. And maybe they don't want to meet each other yet, or maybe they don't have the tools, but we're in a time where they could know each other. It is, and the number one ideological weapon to divide the people that produces material and objective realities that separate them and affects real choices, including moral choices, is white supremacy.
See, and that's where that concept, the sword that heals.
Exactly.
What is the
Yes.
sword that heals?
Right.
You know, we've been divided, but is there a sword,
Yes.
a weapon that will heal?
Right, which is an open question, right? Right? Like, we're not trying to be dogmatic and be like 100%. But that is an open question that we've taken up. And actually, this is what I liked about what Jeremiah was saying, ending with, which is there's a sense that the American people do not trust the state. They do not trust the government. Even in Philadelphia, we have a Black mayor, a Black woman mayor who Black people do not trust. But at the same time, if you were to, if depending on the choices you laid out to him, they might choose her, they might vote for her, they might not vote at all, they might not like the other candidates anymore. But at the end of the day, they do not like her governance.
It does not resolve the contradiction of
It does not resolve the contradiction of governance. It does not resolve like contradictions of the future for like their children themselves. But the people are it feels like the people are waiting and writhing. They are writhing with contradiction and pain and tension, looking for not just their own humanity, but in some ways the way I would phrase it is that the people are looking for both an expression of their own humanity, or like almost they want to believe in humanity, which I see as like they're looking for sacrifice. They're looking for, are there any people willing to sacrifice? And I think they're looking for, I think to some extent, they're looking for a sword that heals. Is there a positive vision? Because in A Birth of a New Nation, his speech on Kwame Nkrumah, he talks about how Kwame Nkrumah, although not totally replicating, although the Gandhi struggle of Ghana did not totally replicate the Indian freedom movement, Kwame Nkrumah took Gandhi seriously because he saw nonviolence as basically that the people will trust and look for a positive vision, a positive program. They will look for, is there a revolutionary strategy that heals? Is there a revolutionary strategy that leaves us in a positive position more than a negative position? So that's so that's how I kind of see us in a certain way.
I do too. I mean, I don't think there's any way to see us otherwise. Unless you just want to discredit. But I think absolutely, I would agree. And I think we must see ourselves that way. I guess I would say we're in a moment of self-definition, of strong self-definition, and many people have, quote, defined us or attempt to define us. But I think now it demands that we, in a very strong way, define ourselves. And as the Declaration says, our purpose, declaration of purpose and resistance. And purpose is and I think that we so strongly identify with King. This is the strong hand, and I agree with that is a terribly strong hand. And once we see him as a revolutionary, and not just because we said, but there's empirical evidence. And, like what Jerry's reading, the Taylor branch, going through that thing so carefully every week. I'm falling asleep while going through it, dozing off. Because it's almost knowing him and knowing that, at least at Birmingham especially, it's a life and death question for the people.
I wanted to just say a quick thing. I just wanted to say, I really resonated with what you were saying, Emily, about the letter from Birmingham jail, reading would you say washed down, super liberal thing. And I have that visceral feeling too of it's it was just almost stuffed down our throats as far as.
I didn't even know it was talked about anymore.
Yeah. I mean, letter from Birmingham jail. It's but I don't know. Something just really resonated with me in the sense of with what you were saying as far as I think it reads as this liberal washed down thing because that's the philosophical framework that we're reading it through. Right? What we're taught in schools.
Mm-hmm.
We're taught this specific moral code, this certain morally philosophical framework to view things, to view these types of readings through, right? I just see that as really important in the sense of, the importance of free school being grounded in philosophy and, and learning the different philosophical frameworks. Why I'm sort of always in tension kind of with this term morality, right? Because I see it as so linked to whiteness in the sense of in schools we are taught a certain way to view and to read things through this moral framework, which is whiteness, basically. I see them as very interlinked. You know what I mean? As far as this is the rule book. This is the rule book that you're supposed to follow. This is how you're supposed to. This is the frame that you're supposed to read these types of things through. This is the morals that you should grow up having.
Can I ask you the moral or the morality?
Yeah.
The morality.
The morality.
That's very important. I just wanted to hear.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
The moral, I think just for clarity's sake, the morality, which means, and I agree with the way you're putting it, the rules that guide our behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the moral imperative might, but I agree that.
Yeah. No, we're taught in schools and through the family, through society, right, that there's a certain rule book of morality to follow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and things like texts like Letter from Birmingham Jail and all these other things that we were given in school are read through that framework. And so, and that's what you said, you have to unlock it, right? You have to you have to actually view the text from a completely different framework, from a different moral, philosophical viewpoint.
Yes.
And so that's sort of why, for the past month or so, I've been going down a deep dive into this term, moral constructivism, right? This sort of idea that it's that we construct these things, right?
Absolutely.
That it's us who invent the rules.
That's right. This is Kant, Immanuel Kant, if you don't mind.
Yeah. And so I guess that's just yeah.
But you see, can you see the king move that subverts that very that morality as whiteness?
Yeah, of course.
You see,
Yeah,
king,
that's the
and
key.
so even in the letter from a Birmingham jail, it is symbolic, though substantive, that he's talking. What is it? 6. I put it that way. But he then challenges the white moral leadership in their house. And you're right. They assume they set the rules, that they have authority. So he takes that from them, almost out the gate. I'm sorry, Emily, I don't mean to
Oh,
keep,
yeah, yeah. for
but
sure.
I'm
I
hearing
think
you
it's-
completely.
I just feel like as someone who grew up with so in this world
Yeah,
of whiteness, it's like white people need to, anyone who grew up like that needs to understand the idea that we create the rules, that
Yeah.
we create the moral grounding that leads our lives,
Yeah.
instead of just going along with what we do.
but isn't that part of the current crisis? And I think that's Jerry's point.
Yeah.
That this, among other things, we can call it civilization. It is a crisis
Yeah.
of the moral authority of whiteness.
Yeah.
And white people know it. I mean, a lot of white people.
Yeah. No, how Jerry was saying, when people are looking for outlets to share
Absolutely.
what they're thinking about, what they're, yeah.
I
Absolutely.
didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, yeah, it's just, I just want to put that out there, because it's like, being someone who didn't have this kind of philosophical, like, whatever learning in school, it's like,
We've been working on this for years.
no, it's, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
it's just, maybe it's important to throw in there, like, this idea that we're not talking about morality as this like
No, no,
thing,
no,
this
no.
thing that's been true
No,
for.
this- in racial
millennia.
absolute terms, we definitely,
No, yeah.
it is the deconstruction of.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But, yeah, maybe just helping people
Yeah,
understand.
see, that's why, if I might return to that letter from a Birmingham jail. Hey, Emily, we might have to think about doing it at the, July 4th thing. And it's not unlike what Lenin did in his philosophical explorations, or what Mao did in his writings on contradiction and on practice. There's no revolutionary that can abandon the terrain of philosophy. That's a bullshit revolution. And so the revolutionary is compelled to address the moral questions, the philosophical questions. And you can, by the way, there are many ways to approach philosophy and epistemology. You can approach them in their pure form, i.e. like Kant, or you can approach them through the practical lives of people and the moral crisis that people face, and the need to excavate or to clarify what all of this is about. I mean, I was talking to Jody the other day on the phone, and he was describing to me his journey back to Christianity. And
Yeah.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
When I
Speak up a little bit, man.
from the epistemological perspective, when you analyze European civilization, you can't take your eyes off of this.
The white Jesus.
Yes, well, not just the white Jesus, but it is the cornerstone that they feel gives them the moral, spiritual authority to tell the unwashed masses how they should behave, how they should live, and how they should have introspection of their existence on this planetary green ball we call Earth. And that they have been endowed by God to enjoy all the natural privileges of one's existence, which is the material world, which is in the ground, natural resources, that which is above the ground, the enjoyment of mountains, lakes, rivers, nature itself. And so what they created was a Christianity that was confiscatory in its very premise of controlling the other races. Because once you're able to see God in that image, in all of the apostles, in the entire Old Testament, you now can occupy space in both the right and left hemisphere of human existence. And so when you read the Bible, I had no intentions of ever becoming a Christian, even though I was raised in the faith, because when I went to church, I was raised a Presbyterian. My father was an elder. My mother was very involved. And when I went in there, it was a dark, gloomy space like this, but even darker, dark benches that are stained and dark glass. And I looked at the windows, and all the images around me were images that didn't look like me. And I realized that the reason for my oppression, being oppressed, was based on their theological position and who I was in God's creation. I was less than human. I was sucking. Okay. And Malcolm said something and they said something back then. The reason black man's catching so much hell is because he worshipped the white man's God. And that checked a lot of black people in my generation. Okay. And so I had to sit back and I said, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. Okay. On the surface it did. Until I spent time overseas and I started to learn about Islam. And I started to read the Bible. And when I read the Bible, there wasn't one European country in the Old Testament, not one. There was no England, Britain, France, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, Norway, Finland, Russia. All the countries in the Bible were in Africa, in the Middle East. So then I realized, and God spoke to me as an interface, not something that was audible to the ear, but interface. He said, why don't you stop looking at the iconography, the pictures, the representation, that the Old Testament is your history and civilization going back to antiquity. So when I started reading the Bible, I'm reading about Egypt, I'm reading about Sudan, I'm reading about Ethiopia, Eritrea, I'm reading about the Horn of Africa. And at this time, Egypt was Black Africa. It had not yet been subdued by the Romans, the Greeks, the Persians, the Babylonians, and then subsequent empires. And now the Arabs. Arabs are not Egyptians. Anwar Sadat, when he came to the United States, he spoke at Howard University and talked about the oppression of the Egyptian, the Egyptians. And when they built the Aswan Dam, they buried their history. Okay, there was a lot of rigmarole. And so when I started to read the Bible, I realized that I interpreted the Bible through a white lens. But I realized he had to do that in order to maintain the master-slave relationship. He had to change this. He couldn't change the words, but he could change what the words represented in terms of my human existence, okay? And how I existed within this creation, okay? Because the Bible made it very clear that God's word would go forth. Well, I realized that that white Christianity is satanic. It's totally satanic. With the Catholic Church, when you read the Bible and you go through it page by page, you realize the Christianity that we practice is far, far, the Old Testament and the New Testament is far removed from what we practice today. I get a great debate. What we practice today is what I call a Christian folklore. Not to be found, not to be embraced in the pages of literature. And so when I did that, the Jesus of Christ of the Bible, which is not his name, they made his name sound European. They Latinized, they Romanized, and they Latin Romanized all the entire language. To be Semitic means you speak an Afro-Asiatic language. That's all Semitic means. Okay, so even in the language itself, it tells you the language is Afro-Asiatic. Jesus Christ was Afro-Asiatic. Now, if we're going to play this game by the one drop rule, okay, then all of Africa is black. Okay, and so when I look at this, I fell in love with that Jesus. I didn't fall in love with the Jesus that had been manufactured to me through theology. And that's putting black theology. I'm not just talking, black theology is whack. It's not, when you read the Bible and you see what goes on in that pulpit, it does not line up. 1 and 1 is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay? And so I would question these pastors on the theology. I would take them aside. And I asked them, where did you get this? And they would give me a spiel. I said, but you can't find biblical support, biblical evidence for your position. Either you believe in the writings or you don't believe in the writings. Okay? And so I don't use the word Jesus Christ because Jesus Christ he's been depicted. He's been confiscated. Okay? The same way Martin Luther King has. The Martin Luther King that we live with is not the Martin Luther King that's taught in schools. Those are two different individuals. Okay? And so I fell in love not with that Jesus, but the creator of heaven and earth. And one of the deep things, and he challenged me not to hate. Because when I came to know Christ, I had Bibles. And I had, I was new in the faith, and I wanted everybody to be a Christian like me. And I realized that would never be, but it was intellectual hypothetical in my mind. This would work out. And I had a lot of hatred for white people. A personal freaking grudge. Because when I was growing up, I saw the dogs. This ain't no freaking movie to me. I watched it as a kid. I saw the dogs. I remember my father couldn't vote until I was 12 years old. It's not a history freaking lesson. This is real time. Okay? Real time existence. I'm not living in the freaking history book. I'm alive today. Okay? And so, all that being said, I would get on a bus or wherever I was, whether I was dressed up for student or not, and I still was in corporate America. I would talk to people of color about being saved and coming to Christ. I would not give the gospel to a white person. I mean, I didn't like white people at that time. And I realized that their hatred for me was, if I didn't let it go, it would change me. It would dehumanize me. It would make me less than a human being. Because the Bible says that all men are created in the image of God. And that includes them. Okay? So, I had to deal with that. You know that sister that had the snowman theory about where Europeans came from? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Shahrazad?
Yeah, she had this theory that white people weren't really human.
Or what's her name? Cress Wilson.
Right. Okay, and they had a different origin. So I worked in an office and I was very successful. I used to like to dress. I was playing to the nine. Worked on Wall Street and
You looked hard.
Yeah. And so white people never knew. See, I was slick. I know the two by image.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I look like you and act like you think I'm you, but I ain't you. Okay. It's about being the nigga inside the house. Okay. You remember the book that came out with a general back in the day took over the U.S. government? You remember the book that came out, The Spook That Sat by the Door?
Oh, yeah.
If you understand the spook that sat by the door, you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I was working in an office. We were living in Washington at that time. I was going to the Watergate. We went to work parties to Watergate. We got senators and congressmen, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I had my office right down the street from the White House. Nice office. My wife was there, bringing the family up. And there was a guy that was a couple doors down from me. He took me out to, to eat a couple of times. We kind of got it. And then the Lord spoke to me one morning. I was getting up, reading the Bible. And he said to me, why don't you bring the gospel to that white guy? So I said to him, well, he's got a lot of money, he knows a lot of people, he runs with senators, congressmen, he bumps elbows, those kind of big people in the gospel. The Lord said to me, no, you want to give him the gospel because he's white. It was like he just jumped in my world and internally said, no, dog, listen, you don't want that white man to go to heaven. You don't want that white man to say. You want to even the score, using me to even the score, so you can go to heaven.
Say that again, you want to even the score to do?
Make sure they go to heaven.
Yeah.
The boy didn't went to hell with that.
Yeah.
So God spoke to me. He said, you can't do that. He said, I can't use you unless you're willing to give the gospel to every man of every color, every creed, every shape, no matter where he is. And from that day forward, after I was convicted, because I had a natural fear of God. It's a fear and a love. Okay. And so I started sharing the gospel with everybody. White, black, blonde hair, blue eyes. You could have a Klan uniform on. Right? Okay? Because I wanted my relationship to be with God. And that changed it. I'm not the same person that I was then. My wife would tell us very good. I was like,
ready to fight, militant.
yeah. I mean,
And you did fight.
I was. We were at the mall.
Something broke
and
out.
these white guys.
Black guy was getting jumped by these white guys. Of course, he jumps in it. It was crazy.
The cops were looking for me. I was picking up chairs.
My father was absolutely for him.
Yeah. Because they were going to jump this black guy who was by himself, but he knew martial arts, and he was rather small, about 5'10", and this big guy was like this white guy, just like Sig Wrestler. And so he thanked me while we were rumbling. While we were rumbling, he was thanking me. He said, "Brother, I got this. I'll need your help." And my wife, she probably this brother was crazy. Baby, she running out the ball, looking for me. You know what I mean? And then I'm not stupid. I know how people think you're gonna be looking for a nigga run. This nigga ain't gonna run, I'm gonna walk. I mean, come on, man. That's fucking stupid. So I walked right by. He said, "Hey, how you doing?" Actually, I walked up to him close. "Hey, man." I said, "What's going on?" It's some black beat people up. I said, I'm glad I got out of there. Yeah. I went to my car, met my wife. So I'm saying all this to say this, is that when you read the Bible, that's my identity. I'm not sharing it. Okay? And it doesn't mean I'm better than you, but God used me. If you notice one thing about black people, and I'll say this, period. Every place you go in the world, whether it's Africa, the Caribbean, Central America, South America, wherever you go, the United States, even if you go to the Indian population that's in India, that's African, we're always at the bottom, socially, economically, educational. And we're hated. We're hated. It don't matter. You can be your complexion, my complexion, it don't matter. You go to the Dominican Republic, you got wavy hair, you still ain't got nothing. You can go to the Congo, you black, you still ain't got nothing, okay? It's like you got a freaking virus. You got a world virus. Nobody in the world wants to catch it. Indians don't want it. Chinese don't want it. The Japanese want it. Man, you got a freaking virus called black. Okay. And so I started to look at that through spiritual eyes. And I realized the reason we're oppressed, because the end days, which they're going to come, there's going to be a message for the whole world about Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and it's gonna come in black skin. Okay, the real Jesus Christ, not this fake one they got in the Catholic Church, not the one they got through the Reformation. All that is fake. The Bible said two things which changed me. It says it says two commandments he gave us: to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, all thy mind, and all thy strength. The second one is to love thy neighbor as thyself. And these two contain all the law. So I love my neighbor as myself. Am I going to break in his house? No. Am I going to, because I don't want to break in my house. Am I going to rape his daughter? No, because I want to rape my daughter. Am I going to try to seduce his wife to have sex with me? No, because I don't want somebody in the street trying to seduce my wife. Am I going to rape his child? No, because I want somebody to rape my child. Okay? So when you look at that inclusiveness, it's a whole ecosystem of morality embedded in it. Okay? So, for example, that's how I try to live. I live my life. When I think about what I'm doing, do I want someone to do that to me? And if the answer is no, then God comes to me and says, why are you doing it? That person is made in my image. Whether they believe that or not, there will come a time where they'll have to confront it. And so what I realize is this: I'll be 73. Okay, the Bible says by 70, he shortened man's life, and that might be much trouble because you get older, you don't get out of bed as quick. You don't do a lot of things like you used to. Like I used to run, I was an athlete, I can't do those things anymore. And I realized that when I'm getting older, as I'm getting older now, I said to somebody, I said, when you get older, God is knocking on the tap on your window, saying your time is short. It's short. It's like if you have a car, you're driving, and you have a flat, low tire. Somebody will say, "Hey man, you make your tires flat? Your tires low?" You don't know because you've been driving that tire for so long. You don't know it's flat. It's like you're old. You don't realize it until one day you wake up and you say, "I'm freaking old." It used to be a time everybody was older than me. Now when I go someplace, everybody's younger than me. You mean that's like what? And how did this happen?
Well, especially when you come to free school.
Yeah, any place. I mean, I this place now, everybody. So I just wanted to say this: is that the Jesus that you've been taught about, that you see professed in the pulpit, it's not the Jesus in the Bible. And Jesus was Yeshua. I use the name of Yeshua HaMashiach. In Islam, from Egypt to Sudan to Ethiopia, all the way down, was all Christian. Africa was invaded by the Muslims. Okay, and there's actually, if you want to see it, I can send you a book about it. It was written. More black people traded into slavery than by the Arabs and by Muslims, inclusive Persians, the Iranians, the Turks, and the Arabs. Their slave trade started before the European slave trade, extended longer. There's a book called The Destruction of Black Civilization. I don't know if you've ever read it, okay? And that is true. The Arabs are very clever.
Wait, can I ask you?
Let me stop. I'll tell you just one point. When they went into Africa, what they would do was they were smart. They understood tribalism and blood ties. So what they would do, they would enslave the young boys. Many of them were castrated, made eunuchs, and the older men were killed. And they would marry the black women. And so the black women would have them alive. So when conflict broke out in Africa or anywhere, they could then call on their tribal ties for them to fight in conflict. So that's how that part of the world became subdued by Islam. So when I started to read the Bible, okay, I started to realize, so I was going to become a Muslim, not a Farrakhan. I was going to become Orthodox Muslim. Okay, so I started to read the history, and there's movies about it. There's nothing hidden about it, and so that's the reality. So for me, I'm a Christian, but I ain't one of them.
Can I ask you a question? How does Martin Luther King and the way we understand Martin Luther King resonate with you?
I think Martin Luther King was a man of his time and his age. I think in order to have a revolution, the people have to be ready for revolution. Okay, because they're brilliant minds like yours right now. Okay, but the people are not ready for that transformative movement. Okay, and so I think it's brilliant. I don't agree totally with it, because I enjoy philosophy, but one of the things I didn't really realize is the mercantile class, the banking class, the financial class, the elite. They realize one thing, that if I control capital, I can control education, I can control agriculture, I can control the media, music. I can control every human aspect of your existence, including politics. Okay, so for me, until capital becomes non-private and becomes like the model they have in China, you can't have political freedom if you have the concentration of wealth in the hands of very, very few people. That's what this is. I mean, it's insane argument. And how can a few people control the natural resources for an entire population? That's not freedom. That's not democracy. It's not republicanism. It's not. Okay? I mean, what you have is you create a language, but that language is not representative of the system that it professes that it is. It's a contradiction. It's contradiction. There's no freedom. Okay? I mean, just think about it. And they tell you that Elon Musk, and they tell you that the tech bros are the richest people in the world. Well, you have to have like a mind of a mouse to believe that. Okay, all you have to do is do simple math. Back in 1908, 1918, around that time, Rockefeller was worth $1 billion. $1 billion. That's over 100 years ago. If you take $1 billion and you compound interest of $1 billion by 6%, 5%, trillions and trillions of dollars. The people that control us, they're trillionaires. They're not billionaires. The whole thing about telling you these new billionaires is for you to think that you can be one too. That's not what they understand. They don't own that. They're not running this country. The Rockefeller, these foundations, if you start to study foundations, NGOs, those are manufactured corporate entities.
Yeah.
Okay, that are a political, sociological, and psychological virus that infects the people to think a certain way and to believe that the person that starts the fire is the same person putting out the fire. Okay, so in this situation, the arsonist and the fireman is the same guy, but the people don't know. Okay, and that's what makes us do. Well, okay, let them fight, let the games begin. And that's the way they think, bro. I'm talking about. I'll send you some stuff. Listen.
No, I agree with you.
If you look at the armies, if you look at the East Indian Company, the Dutch Indian Company, they were corporations that had a military. What do we have today? Corporations that have a military. The CIA, NSA, all those are extensions of the private sector.
Joe, let me see if there's
I'm
something.
done. Sorry.
No. No, it's very interesting. Everybody's very quiet listening. I just want to know, do they have anybody got any questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that I do have a question, and I think that when we are discussing, suppose the current crisis, the crisis of the war in Iran, and we can we can kind of say that the current government is in alliance with these technocrats, financial people, bankers, and everybody. And on both sides of the two-party system, both the Republicans and the Democrats are more or less, extremely war, like pro-war. And that's kind of how, as we have discussed before, how America makes a lot of its profits. And they also control media, technology, education, everything, as we have discussed. And still the question remains, why is this war so unpopular? Why is 17% of all Americans, only 17% trusting of the government? Why is this a historically unpopular war? So even with this level of control over the education and mass media and dissemination of information, you have only a few people who remain loyal to the government and the state, so to speak. So, I agree that all of this exists. However, the question for me still remains then, what is motivating the people? What is in the consciousness of the people that sees all of this information and still chooses to reject it?
Yes, can I answer that question? They reject it, but the price at which they reject it is very, very low. One of the things that you take away from the French Revolution, and this is true, you can control any population as long as there's food, no matter how bad the quality. As long as they have housing, no matter how poor the housing, as long as they have access to drugs and alcohol, and they have they will become hypersexualized. So there's certain conditionalities that I can create as a banker to control a group of people.
Joe, can I ask you?
And so I just want to answer good. So listen, what's going on right today? Well, they have Jay-Z, them and the Roots picnic. Okay.
Oh, the Roots pick.
The Roots picnic. They got FIFA Cup. Okay. And they got something at the convention center. You got the Eagles, you got the Phillies, you got soccer, you got bowling, you got tennis, you got racquetball, you got all kinds of things. And you got instant. And if you don't like that, you got sex on the phone, you can get drunk, you can get high. And the wealthy class know that as long as I keep that affordable, the people will remain under hypnotic spell. And they'll let you do whatever, you can do whatever you want to do. And so that was my take. When I looked at the French Revolution, I looked at what was the core. If you look at the core of all revolutions, once the people can't have bread, they don't have housing, they don't have those really base things. You don't have to give them a lot, just something. Like what do you have right there? A little something. That's not for quoi. That's just noodles. Yeah, he got some noodles, he ain't going nowhere. Yeah, come on, I got a wife. She gonna do what she wanna do. Even though I live in a shack, I got some cheap hot dogs that will give me cancer. I got a cell phone, I can watch pornography, and I can look at games on my cell phone, even though I can't afford to go to the game. And I'm not taking no bullet. I don't say bullet, I don't mean literally a bullet. I'm not getting out there. And so what they realized, what created King was those things were not allowed. They took away, you can't drink at the water fountain. You can't go to the amusement park. You can't have this, you can't have that. So they said, okay, well, let them have those things, but keep them in the same position. Don't complain, and let's give them some leaders. That they can give.
Let Emily comment, because
I'm sorry.
No, actually, you went directly to the question I was going to ask you. I'm curious, do you think Montgomery in the 1950s, let's say, do you think you would describe, do you think would you describe it like that? Because even though today we look back at Montgomery in 1950s and say there was oppression and segregation, at that time, the people living at that time, like, you know, people did have jobs. They weren't great, like it was segregated, but there were jobs. It was a time of peace for America. JFK later down the road, people saw him as like pretty good. Like, it was not a time of economic turmoil. I guess, what would your assessment be of Montgomery in 1955?
Well, when you look at Alabama had become an industrialized state. With the northern capital all of Alabama. It came about because of World War II. That was the industrialization period. So the Northerners and the Southerners have always one bird with two different wings. I never saw this separation between the two. I always look at where is the bird flying to, not on what wing. Okay? And that's the reality. When I grew up, when I went to Oakland High School, there was no running water. You couldn't drink from the fountains. We had no air conditioning. We had a small gym. We had old books. We were under-resourced. It's now 50 years later, 55 years later, no books, still no drinking, no potable water, no air conditioning. Okay? Even though you have elected officials in blackface. Okay? And so they become very adept at how you manipulate people. And you manipulate people first by phenotypical representation. There's something about phenotype that kind of soothes the soul. Okay? And so look, we've had black mayors since 83, and the socio-economic condition of black people is worse. The families are worse condition, the neighborhoods are worse, everything is worse. But they know as long as you get blackface, it's okay. And I was a school teacher. When the economy collapsed, Obama came in, and there was all this money that was rushed through all these programs. And it wasn't until I went to the school district, I realized as a school teacher, really what I was in. I was in prison.
Yeah.
They're in prison. And the teachers, most of them, not all of them, but I say 85% of them, they're dumb as a piece of chalk. I mean, I would sit in the classroom sometime, and I could tell they never read a book after they graduated. They never picked up a newspaper. They didn't know what was going on. And they would sit in front of the students and they would teach, and I just said, this is like, you know, these kids are not being educated. But it's purposeful. Because of the prison system.
I have a question. It connects both what you're saying and also what Jeremiah had said earlier, is that essentially people are under attack, whether they're socially isolated, whether they're pacified, whether through social media, through this propaganda machine. And so, like, I'm curious, I mean, both with how Crawford responded, what do you do? How do you, well, I guess you were saying that the people are not ready for revolution.
Right.
So how do you prepare the people? Or do you feel that things can change? And what would that
Things will
require?
change when they're ready for it. Okay.
Do you think that things have to get, do you think that conditions have to get worse for people?
Much worse. Much worse. Okay.
So how would that work out? So, like,
Well, I think right now, because we're moving, you know, I have to be a one to, I just finished reading a book called "The Society in Society and Technocracy," and the movement to technocracy was identified back in the 40s, that we would become a technocratic state, and to be human would be redefined. And really what it is now, it gave rise to transhumanism, going back to the writings of H.G. Wells. This goes way, way back. Okay, so where we are in this society, the dehumanizing, this being us being no longer not knowing what it is to be human, the destruction of the family, the isolation, all this was being written about. How do you create the technocratic state? And the technocratic state it believes in, it doesn't believe in individualism, and it redefines what it is to be human. It has a whole different definition. So if you look at our society, the fabric and the of the social organization and structure, and even how people think has changed. The minds have changed. Okay, and they realize that you change how people think, how people perceive themselves. And once you control the two factors you have to control, they have what they call, it's called the four states of power. But the main one, you want to control people, control education, and you control media. Once I control those two things at an early age, I can control that population. As long as I get some very, very basic necessities of what they need to exist. And people really sick, you know.
So, I mean, I guess I hear what you're saying. What I'm trying to understand is, okay, knowing that, what do you do? What do you do? What do you think is the way in which things do improve? That
Well,
society can change.
You can't change what a man is happy doing, even if you realize you should. In other words, you know that that reality is twisted. But this is the best analogy I give you. And this is what I love. I give this to all people. When you go into, if you walk into a bathroom, a public bathroom at the airport, someplace where they don't clean it, when you walk in, you go, oh my God, damn, it stinks. It's like repulsive, right? Stay in that bathroom for about 15 minutes, you can't smell it anymore. It goes away, okay? Then the next person walks in and says, damn, it stinks like, you know what, right? And you can't smell it, okay?
Yeah,
Now,
so what do you do?
well, you can't do anything because he don't smell it no more. What are you gonna do? Okay, so things have to change to such an extent degree that he smells the shit.
So now we're all in this stinky bathroom.
Right.
What do you do to get
Somebody
out?
has to smell it. Okay, they all have to agree, it has to change to such a degree. There's where everybody's in there and somebody says, after they've been in there for a while, they start to look around, they see the toilets, what's in the toilet, they see what's, you know, why the floor is wet. And they say, man, you know what? And we're standing in the back with a bunch of piss, and you know what?
Mhm.
And then they look out the bathroom and they see the other room was clean.
Can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
yeah, sure.
I think this is a discussion about assumptions.
Right.
You know, for example, Alice or Emily
Right.
proceed from a certain set of assumptions and you from another set.
Yeah, I'm pretty.
No.
I didn't say that.
Laughing good to everybody. I knew you when you wore those wonderful suits.
Yeah.
And sure, I mean, the brother looked the part, man. I was very impressed when I first saw you, Joe. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Sometimes
I didn't know you was a hoodlum too.
No, I grew up in West Philadelphia.
Well, true. Okay.
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 And I grew up, I was around the coast, the moons,
The coast, yeah.
March Street. I had to run.
With the barbecue. Okay. But I think it's about let me just do this because, you know, when we look at the objective conditions in this country, for instance, you know, only 17% of the people believe they can trust the government. What are we to conclude from that? I think we would conclude that the ruling class, I'm going to use this word, Mia, is in a schwang swine. Zoo swine, you know. In other words, there's no move they could make that they can win. You think they still got some room to maneuver.
Oh, they got a lot of them.
Interesting.
And I'm assuming that they don't. And in this situation, that's why, you know, we've been talking about we should look at Philadelphia the way the civil rights movement looked at Birmingham. Because we're not in a situation where things will just go as planned by the ruling elite. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if they do not have space to maneuver or less space to maneuver, what then do they do? And this is where we think that the ball then moves to the court of the masses. I don't know how you read, because I'm looking at the historical trend. When Kennedy was the president, 80% of Americans trusted the government. It's been on a steady decline, but this is now an all-time low. And most people say the country is going in the wrong direction. And when, yeah, that's, how do you, oh, well, I'm sorry, Mia.
I think it depends where you are in the car. For the elite, the global elite, the car's going in the direction it was aimed at.
Going what?
It's going in the direction they aimed at. What they were trying to achieve. What we have right now in America, this is what they wrote about in the 19th. I'm reading this book from the Technocratic State and Technocracy, okay? And in the book that was written, that was just finished by Eric Schmidt and Kissinger wrote a book right before they died. And he talked about the Technocratic State.
Yeah.
And it is an inhuman state of existence. But it's a state in which human beings put into paralysis. And he's put into a state of being comatose. He exists, but he doesn't. It's like the technocratic state creates a human being in body, but not in soul. He becomes a Frankenstein. And they've done the studies and they know how to do it. And you see it being implemented in a lot of ways. I mean, the deepest, and I'm thinking about this is what's so deep.
Let me ask you another question.
And I'll show you how they're doing.
No, let me ask you a question. What do you make of the fact that more Americans support the Palestinians than support Israel? Or what do you make of the fact that 60% of the people opposed the war even before it began and continue to oppose it? Aren't these like, you could use the word game changers? These are events that have never occurred in this country. I mean, I don't know whether you went through Vietnam. I went through it. And almost the same number of people that supported the war in Vietnam at the start supported it at the end, and so on. But here you have a shift. I just, if you were to ask me, this is a condition even worse than the French Revolution or the time of the Russian Revolution. Well, first of all, that more people are connected to one another than ever before. Emily brings this up sometimes, that a poor person in North Philadelphia, while not knowing a poor person in Butler, Pennsylvania, does know that person existentially. That white person is having a problem reconciling his or her whiteness with their poverty,
Right.
Which raises an existential and a moral question. This is what this Emily was raising. The moral question of now, what do I do with this white thing? You know what I'm saying? What do I do with this? It's just like, if you have a set of clothing, a shirt, it don't fit no more. What do I do with it? I think the country is in the throes of an existential transformation. I think white people will go through something similar to what black people went through in the 60s. This is going to be not all white people, of course. I think the numbers, if we get 30% of white people,
That's rich.
Yeah.
we won the battle. The ruling class can't rule. And this, I think we're on the throes of that. That's why, I'm talking to Emily a lot of, you know, just.
Let me ask you a question.
Oh,
This is
okay.
important. How do you define rule?
How do I define what?
Define rule. What's your definition of rule?
This is interesting. We're talking about the state, the ultimate deployer and user of force against the people. See, that was an easier calculation when it was black people protesting. The calculation becomes more complicated because the ruling class has invested in the theory that most white people will accept that they're white. You know, but what does it mean if 25% are in a crisis about this white thing? Could I just give an example? Story? Oh, yes, please.
I want to jump on that, police.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I thought about that too. So I started doing some research. And I found out the police forces across the country, including the military, are bringing in people from foreign countries for those positions so they don't have a relationship with the people they're policing. That's what they're doing. And so the more and more rank of the military and the police forces are made up of foreign nationals.
Can I just say this? Here you have, they're trying to improvise, so they got a lot of temporary maneuvers. But I think we're seeing something at a deeper level here. The identities of people and what they identify with. When only 17% identify with a government that claims whiteness, that you should, in other words, this is what you be talking about. For decades and decades and decades, they've said to white people, the government is white, you're white, and therefore we are on the same side. What if the white people are saying, no, I don't trust you anymore? So we're not on the same side. Okay, you can bring, let's say you bring in Guatemalans and put them on the police force. You're just making it hard for them, for the Guatemalans. Or let's say you get an ICE force, you go into Minneapolis, and you're going terrorizing people. And then suddenly the white people say, we're not going to be terrorized, dog, you know. It's just, I think the evidence is so abundant that we are on the throes of something that will change this country, but how long it will take, no one can predict. And that's why, you know, I think we've said that let us think of Philadelphia as a Birmingham. It's not Birmingham, of course, but let us think in those terms. Let us think of King as a revolutionary. Let us think of the civil rights movement as a phase of a Black freedom movement. I mean, all of these kinds of other ways of seeing the world. And therefore, like you say, the Elon Musk, the Bezos, look, first of all, people have to respond to this new AI and these data centers because the electricity bill going to be too much. You heard me coming and going, you taking from me. Trump is, I mean, and this is kind of symbolic of the whole crisis. He has lost everything. He is, I mean, literally a dead man walking. So we here have to say, are we quiet about it? We have to think about this. And, you know, the 250th anniversary, I think we're the only people, certainly in this city, that have come up with an alternative declaration. And by the way, we want to read it at the statue of Richard Allen on July 4th. Hope we can do it. But somebody got to say something about this. And it can't be the same thing that's been being said. It can't In other words, I hear Alice, do we act or do we retreat?
I think you act, but I think in order for this new movement to be successful, you're going to have participation of the administrative class and the professional class has to be part of it. So, for example, today, you know,
But we can't wait for them.
but it's coming. This is my point. They were very clever. The debater, and I always use debating class because they're the controlling class. They were very clever in dividing labor. They separated labor into the plumber and the doctor and the lawyer. They're both laborers because the day your ass stops working is the day you don't eat. That's the whole thing. Okay, and they accepted it because of the wealth index that was provided to the professional class and administrative class. Now those numbers aren't working because you're coming out of school, you're a doctor, you're $100,000 a day. So I think the next great movement will be the formation of a hyper, I'll call it a hyper or a super union. The joining of labor in one labor class, not to serving your area. In other words, the doctors have a union,
Maybe,
the nurses have a
but
union,
maybe-
every department, and they come together as a collective labor.
But let me ask you this. Yes, maybe, but that is a probability that's very low on the scale of possibility. But then what we're looking at is an uprising of the poor and working classes. I mean, they can't live. And you know, Emily always talks, she works for a hospital, healthcare union, and people who work in healthcare can't have health insurance. And this is a man talking about, I want a $1.5 trillion military budget. You talking about the knives being out. This cat, I mean, he got to watch his back. You're taking too much from too many people. And the Bezos and the, what's this, the Doge guy,
Musk.
Musk. These are not intelligent people. These are fronts for money. And the people, you talk about financiers and bankers, do they know how to rule? Do they know how to govern?
You're talking about creating something where everybody.
And then you get a cat like Peter Thiel. He running around the world talking about the Pope as an agent of the Antichrist. Okay, he just lost 1.5 billion people. I mean,
Argentina.
Thiel's
Thiel's moving to Argentina.
Yeah, well, I would. Good luck.
He's afraid of what's going to happen.
Yeah, he can't live here anymore. Peter Thiel.
Yeah, I feel like maybe
just
Samir
wanted-
knows.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mir.
I wanted to wait till you guys were done so I could lay out, my own argument of what was going on. But, I personally want to say I agree with a lot of what you said, Joe. And there's a documentary, I've already told you about the book that Shantanu and I read called The Princes of Yen. That talks about how the finance capital, the book by Richard Wagner, the professor from Germany, who talks about how, the Americans were so, they took offense that the Japanese were outperforming them after World War II. It's because they were using quantitative easing and
The supply cap.
and the Americans said, you can't do this because this is embarrassing us. So they, basically his thesis was finance capital created the crisis in order to change the material conditions in the country Japan. And so, I think that
The Plaza Accords.
I don't know. But there's where I work, I was at the front desk and there's a judge and he said he could go to any restaurant in Philadelphia and he didn't have to pay. And the receptionist said, all right, I get it, but why did he have to say that? Why was he so open about it?
Mm.
That he didn't care. That he didn't care. And Stokely Carmichael, he has that lecture where he calls King. King was a mobilizer, but he wasn't an organizer. And I think that we have a different assessment of King. And for me, I view things.
King's my hero. King,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be sitting here right now having this conversation if it hadn't been for King.
And I think for me, I'm a historical materialist. So I don't think there is a future. Basically, I view it as the revolutionary imperative. We have to decide. We have to, like Lenin, seize the moment to create the revolution. And without us, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen if we wait for it. And to the story of the judge and the what you said about the stinky bathroom and the NGO industrial complex and the media. There's all these forces against us. But then you have King, in an economically prosperous time where it's post World War II. You've got growth. You've got Americana existed. Isn't it interesting how he was able to create a movement of love?
That was a lot.
That's why I started off with the
The
Revolutionaries.
circumstances, for example, if you look at the Russian Revolution,
So let me ask you this question: why can't, if the circumstances are more advantageous now, where's the leadership? So that's the point I'm trying to get to right now.
there's no leadership right now because you have all of black Philadelphia is up there, up on the.
So this is.
And
They can't afford
Because
to.
let me go back 10 years.
But this is real.
But it is real. But let me go back 10 years to preschool, where we said, do you remember the radical revolutionary science, radical times? We said that, 10 years ago that these are radical times and that we're striving for revolutionary science. That's what preschool was working on 10 years ago. And I think we're still it's a long-term project. But isn't it interesting? We said back then that these are revolutionary times, absolutely the conditions. Doc said that this is like the French Revolution, and the ruling class are saying, let them eat cake, let them gamble on prediction markets, let them, gamble on baseball swings, but now there's no leadership. Isn't that is the problem? I think King was able, and I think, and the times, but where's the excuse for us in this room? And
Because, listen, I had 5 of my family members got shot. I have family members right now, the hood, I know the hood, okay? I know the people, I know the mentality. I know what's going on in the black church, okay? I know my people because, for example, I could be in a situation and have you guys with me, and I know the situation ain't cool. It'll go right over your head. Okay, because I know, you know what I mean? And so what I'm saying is, you've got everybody up there on Belmont Plateau, which is a microcosm of Black American period, whether it's Chicago, New York, wherever you go. Okay.
so this is the challenge. So this is the challenge. So how are we going to mobilize these people to say, this is
I'm gonna tell you who I am right now. This is me. Okay, I'm with it. They playing music, people smoking, and you smoke down, and you don't have to go to jail. And this marijuana's hot, it's stronger. I can drink all I want. The girls will walk around half naked. Okay, my testosterone levels up to the roof, and we jam. And you come up to me talking about some revolution. You ain't happy, man. Listen, I don't know what you listen. I got a pair of sneaks I want. I got the jewelry I want. And I got a cell phone. Okay? And I can get what I want to get if I go that way with women all day long. Okay? So their mind isn't there. You can't, it's up here. It's the cortex. You're trying to reprogram something. And I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong, but I'm saying I realize that, Listen, I've been laying back.
Okay, now Joe, let him come up. This is an
all
interesting
due
debate.
respect, Joe, you're very charismatic. And a bunch of my friends are up there right now at the Roots Picnic, but they're not here, at the preschool. You're 100% correct. But I would make the argument that, Joe, I'm probably closer to that age. I'm not a stranger of that scene. A lot of those young people, they're just they're deeply, deeply existentially upset. And you can chill, you can jam, you can do drugs, you can get a medical marijuana card, but I know so many stories of young people. You either go off a cliff or you disappear, and it becomes a question of when does the rubber hit the road? As revolutionary scientists, we can't make predictions, because there's so much in motion. We talk about systems, but we're here trying to say, okay, what are the conditions where eventually people start shooting up the Roots Picnic because they're so pessimistic, or something. So there has to be. My thing is, King was the leader in a economically prosperous time when segregation did not need to be exist. How does the revolutionary force?
Hey, Joe, let him make his point.
How does the this is what we're preschool's working on? How does and you're right, those people, they're doing it for themselves to be up for the Roots Picnic. It's not like it's a Woodstock thing, like free love, I love everybody. It might be, in a fake way, because everything's commodified. But the real task is how do you get everybody to change their imperative to be like, this isn't enough? Is it the economic conditions go low enough? Because I would make the argument that King did it without economic conditions. Is it just the church? I would argue that it wasn't the church because King butted heads with the church, and we have the church today. So I don't know. Someone else maybe can take it on from there, but that's what I'm saying. Is just I don't think it's economic, but I don't think it's hopeless. And I think that the real task that what we were saying 10 years ago is we have the conditions and we have the science. The real task is to provide a group of revolutionary leaders that the public trusts, that are authentic. The state will collapse on its own, because it's so bad. We have this judge saying, he's going to die. He's already dead, actually. There needs to be a certain level of leadership that assumes the task of calling for this revolution, that creates this movement where we have a revolution of values. So it's not about like a Roots Picnic or FIFA or and one last thing I'll end. The university system. When we were talking 10 years ago, we talked a lot about this crisis in the university. And I think, what we're seeing is an elite overproduction. There are, what you were saying about white collar versus blue collar jobs, there aren't enough white collar jobs for people to be happy, especially young people. I know a lot of people in tech who are deeply unhappy. They're in New York, they're in San Francisco, and they're deeply unhappy. A lot of university kids join the encampments, and a lot of it has to do with elite overproduction. There aren't the jobs. We might not have a revolution from below. This is just another possibility. We might have a revolutionary from discarded elites, which is actually
Discarded elites.
Yeah.
But that was my point when I talked about the union. The labor movement, I'm not defining the way it was in the past. I'm saying the very people that you're talking about would join and cluster with those of different academic backgrounds, different education, different systems, skill systems across the racial line, because it's going to be one that includes the administrative state, the professional class, along with the lower class.
And we used to say
that
that Trump was a lot of those discarded elites. A lot of the Miller and Trump and all these people, Alan Dershowitz, they all used to be Democrats, and they were scorned Democrats, and they were outside the Republican Party, and the Republican base chose the outsiders over the Republican establishment. But anyway, my point is,
So
we're talking about 2016 and
that's neoconservatism that born.
no, I don't think Miller and what's his name, Bannon and Trump are neoconservatives. I think there's something else.
I'm not them, but I'm talking about, when the Republicans party.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Jeb Bush when he was demolished. But my view of history is one of we can come up with predictions and we can analyze models and discuss systems. But also we also have to acknowledge our agency and the people
That's not what I'm saying.
into seizing. But that's the revolutionary imperative.
Yes.
And if we were another organization, maybe if we were having tea with my dad, we could just talk shit, talk global politics. You'd really like I'd like you to meet him actually.
Right. But what I'm saying is, being at the school district for 5 years, meeting their parents, being with people that are on drugs, people that are addicted to drugs. There is a pathos that's in our community that's deeply spiritual.
Yeah.
It's metaphysical. Okay? And that is where we are right now.
Yeah.
How could you ration? Some of the things that I experienced at the school district, some of the things my friends experienced, I cannot give you a human explanation for it. It's debauchery at a level that's beyond one's imagination. Okay, and it's rampant. It's unnatural.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what I'm saying to I say to a lot of people I grew with, the African Americans today is in blackface and coarse hair, but that the person that exists inside that soul, it's a different soul. It's not the soul. It's a different soul. It's a different human being. He's really in blackface only. He's not. He has total disconnection from his history, his past. He is right. I had a conversation with some of these kids, and I mentor a lot of kids right now that have no identity of self or existence of self. It's a different, when I get with them, I have to it's different.
That's an open.
Okay, they've been battered so much, they've been beat up so much. Okay, how do you have a little kid, okay, this tall, and you drag the kid down the street and call them motherfuckers? Come on, you little motherfucker. Okay, okay. So what I'm saying is, this is much deeper than what we're facing. Okay, they have, and I include white people in this. They have changed our psyche of what we are and what it means to be human.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay,
Right.
and so I'm not saying, listen, I wouldn't be here. No, okay. What I'm saying, what we're facing right now, I don't think that humanity's ever faced it. Okay, we're talking about programming the human mind at an industrial scale. Okay, and that's frightening. You're talking about the dissolvement of human thought, independent human thought. So you're a freaking zombie. That's what they want. They want to zombify this civilization. And you're doing it by redefining language. Language is different. The first thing I do is change. If you look at the language today, and you look at the language of books that you read back in the 1970s, 1980s, the language of the 60s, language has changed. Changed to the universal level. So listen, that's the reason how I have to maintain my sanity is in Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach. It's not in this world. because man has gotten to the point that Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and the ruling class, they're freaking psychopaths.
That's true.
They're psychopathic. You do, and they have the concentration of wealth and power, and that's frightening.
But then there's China.
Huh? Sorry?
Then there's
Then
China.
he's trying-
I was just gonna say, the two options are the Japanese model of neoliberalism, where you have, more adult diapers bought than baby diapers. And then you have the Chinese option.
I mean, I'm watching a program from Japan, and young men are buying sex dolls.
Yeah.
I mean, this, and it's sold out.
But I think you,
Think how deep, now think this is deep.
no, I don't want to think about
Look, this is
No, I-
society.
But I think,
But think about a human being. Hold me
no, I
on for a
think
second.
about you, because you,
What I'm
what
saying
you said, what
is
you
so-
said from the beginning was, and we talked about this 10 years ago, because I know you say there was all these challenges, but what we said about Black Reconstruction was there was challenges.
This
The
is
Black-
bigger than Black Reconstruction. This is civilization. This is a global restructure of our humanity.
That's because this is modernity.
Okay, and so when you think about in Japan, who has a low birth rate, an aging population, you have grown men going down the store to get a freaking doll. I mean, you think about it, and it's all, and they make it have flesh, on all that, but that's deep. You think about the psychological program you have to have going on in your head to go get a doll.
Can we let?
Yeah,
Am I-
let me,
Eddie's been wanting to
let me, let me get in right now, bro. I'm gonna join the discussion with you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me ask you, how do you convince you're a young man, right?
I'll tell you about it.
Let him tell you.
I'll tell you about it. I'll tell you.
Are you gonna die?
I'll tell you right now. So, yeah, bringing the discussion back to something that you had said, Jeremiah, where like everybody's talking about the different dimensions of the crisis that's glaring everybody in the face. That's political, economical, and there's so much tension within society that nobody can escape it unless you're Peter Thiel and you isolate yourself in who knows where in Argentina. And yet there's not clear signs of mobilization, the likes of which we had seen before. And, trying to assess something like, for example, taking very seriously what you heard from Apostle Crawford, who, dedicates their lives in service to his congregation, brings himself to the inner hearts of so many people, and gets to see people in a lot of ways that you and I don't get to. And, his concern that, you might have to address a social crisis and it's things like isolation before you can take on the political demands, even though it's very blaring in your face and inescapable. And that requires in some way being able to address that people have been denied and stripped their humanity, and you need a kind of strategy to help them reclaim that humanity. I think of, like you, I'm trying to, measure these kind of things. And I think, for example, very recently, there was like a new, luxury collaboration that it was like Royal Oak, which is like, like the Audemars Piguet, very, expensive watches, collaborated with this Swatch company, and they're, affordable luxury. And they had to bring in the National Guard in the King of Prussia Mall because you had droves of young men, primarily Black young men, to be honest, absolute frenzy that were like overwhelming the whole damn mall. It was a danger. It was dangerous to them. It was dangerous to other people. And since then, they've been camping out like for days. You have grown men who have not, been sleeping on the sidewalk right there, that are wearing adult diapers, that have not showered, and they're like, they need to get it. They need to get their hands on this, luxury status item. And I mean, it's a little, concerning and maybe somewhat comical, this frenzy and this drive. But I think it is another, measurement of the young people in society who feel so strongly the need to reclaim their humanity that they mobilize in such a way. All, and this is not just in the King of Prussia. This is like happening all across the nation. You have these young men camping outside like this for days, trying to get their hands on something that will give yourself a sense of value in a society that has done everything it can to strip you of your value. They're like $300 little watches, man. They have little $300. I'm sure some of these men are unemployed, but you got $300 and you're like, how can I, give myself some sense of value? And I do feel that in some way you need to be able to, yes, address the economical or the political and spiritual, and this in a way will, I guess, allow young people to address, and young and old, address this need to reclaim your humanity in a way that will allow you to restructure society and put history in your hands. And
could you do that one more time? Formulate that one more time.
yeah. Whether you're young or old, it is necessary to be able to, I guess. Oh man, now that I got to redo it, then I lose it.
Yeah, it was a great formulation.
Address this need for people to reclaim humanity and do that in a way that allows us to be able to address that need that people have to reclaim humanity. You must confront that need in a way that allows us to restructure society and put history, I guess, in young people and I guess even old people's hands. And that can address political or economic concerns. Certainly, it's hard to have a sense of humanity when, as Emily said, you have someone whose job is to provide healthcare for people, but you're denied that very same, what I would say is human right. And it looks, I feel that it looks different in different, I guess, sections of society because, but just by that measurement, I didn't see too many old people that were in that frenzy to get that stupid watch. And then, of course, you do have a lot of older people who I feel are in great need and are suffering. Even, I guess you talked about that judge guy who had everything in the world and had felt the need to proclaim that, I used to be this big dog, people gave me free dinner, I could pay for it. Or I guess the people that are actually buying the real AP watches. And I guess in a sense, I do feel that the older people are significant because they do represent that process of degradation that has gotten us here. But then you got young people who, I guess now we're here and that's all they know. That's all that they've been living under. And then, it is further complicated by the color line, where white people are experiencing it in a different way. And for the first time now, they're really feeling it economically, that kind of degradation that was exclusively supposed to be for, I guess, darker people. And so, in a certain sense, I do feel that some of this social process to reclaim humanity must involve, I guess, these different sections of society knowing each other in new ways that they have not known each other before. These different kind of relationships, young, old, or even young amongst each other.
I think this conversation made me think of a lot of things, and I guess one of the things that I wanted to say out loud, because this was in my mind for a little while, which is that I believe that things can always get worse.
Can always get worse.
Can always get worse. I think that things could have gotten worse in 55, in 57, in 63, and it can get worse now. But the point is to not let it get worse, right? I feel like we can sense that history has taught us a lot of things, and we don't want to return to the bad times. We want to move forward, progress. And in all of that, in thinking about all of that, as Baldwin says, I can't afford despair. I can't afford to tell my child or children that there is no hope. I can't afford to tell them that there is no sky. Like, I want that toilet to be clean because my child will enter it one day. And I might have forgotten the stench of the toilet, but I haven't forgotten that it exists. That 15 minutes ago I entered it, and that's what it greeted me. And that one day my child will be here on this, in this place, in the same place. And I don't want that. And that kind of makes me think about what we were talking about, Kant's categorical imperative, how the way that Kant formulated it, it was on the basis of the universal formulation of law, where any action that you might want to, that you are going to do, you have to think that if everybody did this, then does it result in the destruction of the action itself? Like if everybody lies, that would result in the destruction of trust, of faith. And that would be an immoral action. And I think that the way that we see the categorical imperative as the revolutionary imperative, which is the moral imperative, and I get a lot of this from King, where the kind of things that he preaches, the kind of things that he has written about and spoken about is keeping humanity at the center of his formulations. It's like, okay, if you think about doing an action, and again, everybody does it move forward society towards revolutionary change? That is moral. That is what is considered to, like, that's the way that I feel like the categorical imperative and the revolutionary imperative has evolved. There is an evolution of all of that. And I think that what you said about, it took me a minute, but I think I finally clocked what you were talking about when you said that it's a wrong assumption to think that civil rights is the end goal of a revolution, but instead it is freedom. And I immediately thought of Gandhi and how in the beginning of the Indian freedom struggle, he was fighting for civil rights in a way. He was like, in his early attempts, it was that we have to, because he believed so deeply in nonviolence, it was like the British can continue to rule us, but we need better enforcement of certain rights and laws and all of that. But then his formulation or his theory of nonviolence also evolved, and it went further and said, no, we can't stop at civil rights. We have to go towards complete freedom, complete independence, and then civil rights will follow. And I guess a lot of people still in India debate about this, that has civil rights followed? Was independence truly the thing that we ought to have fought for? And you have the example of India, and you have the example of Ghana as well as in this sermon given by King, which are two nations that have achieved independence and freedom through nonviolent means. And I was really moved when I read the part where King was talking about how Nkrumah was dancing with the Duchess of Kent, I think.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is only possible because this was a nonviolent struggle, a nonviolent revolution, where you can have the former slave and the former enslaver dancing in a room together. He sort of saw that as a very beautiful sight. And I think that is even more important in America, because at least in India or Ghana, you can say that your colonizers left. You didn't have to live with them. In America, you have to live with them. So I feel like the nonviolent struggle becomes even more important to achieve, and with even more strict standards, if that makes any sense. Because I think, and like I understand how people might react to violence. The normal, like the kind of visceral reaction is always with violence, with anger, and even I think I was reading a couple of Baldwin's speeches that he gave after Birmingham, and when children were killed, he wrote and talked a lot about that. And in that moment, he was like, if violent means are necessary, we have to go there. By any means necessary, we have to prove that we are men and we deserve to be here. And so I kind of understand that, but again, there is an evolution of Baldwin that also occurs where over time, by the time the March on Washington takes place, he has come around to nonviolence. He has come around to the quality um, and the philosophy surrounding nonviolence and its importance, where he says that we have to, white people and black people, we have to accept that we are here and we are a part of each other, and our long history of struggle is a love affair. And only understanding that will lead to our maturation and our eventual, freedom. And I think that if somebody like Baldwin, who's a deep thinker, and was at one point so he was very convinced about violent revolution and everything because he saw the violence. But I think that King also had a deep impact on him. And thinking of Philly as Birmingham is, I think, a very, very important. I think I took a lot out of that. That thinking of Philly as Birmingham of the modern day makes me think about the youth question, makes me think about the poverty and everything. So, Eddie, Jahan, Michelle, and I, we've been researching a lot about the youth and incarceration. And in Philly, only 15% of youth, which is below the age of 18, like 14 to 18, only 15% of children are black. But 65% of all children who are in detention facilities are black. When I say children, I mean below the age of 18. That number is astronomical. The average in the whole of the US is 40%. In Philly, it's 65% of all children who are in detention facilities arrested before their 18th birthday. And that really makes me think about how this mobilization of children for a real cause. If children are being put into prison without any cause, or maybe delinquency, and I think talking to Brother Gregory has really opened my mind about how black children react to society in general. Where they're made to feel unwanted, where they're made to feel like they will not amount to anything. And that's why they get into a life of crime and delinquency. But if incarceration is something that, I don't know what you said, it's a transformative process, the moral maturing of children. If that is a possibility, then why not do it towards something, for a cause, Yeah.
Can can I just respond to this because this thing of and Joe brought it to schools being conservatory. It's also it's talked about also in other circles where they always talking about systems and, Foucault and that stuff. But I wanted to get back to the sword that heals, because, I want to respond also to Eddie and Joe about the deep trauma rooted, psychologically, or, Joe said metaphysically, that required, in Joe's case, a metaphysical intervention of, a non-white Christ. Or, I also think a lot about the letter from Tolstoy to Tagore that said, the issue with British colonialism over India or even Africa is not a problem, is not a military issue. It's a psychological issue, because Indians or Africans would outnumber the British. And, it's a lot what, Joe said, these things, Doc, you've been talking about it for a long time too. When you would just, when I first joined free school, you would talk about distractions, and there are so many distractions. But what King and Gandhi were able to work out through the method of nonviolence was something. And, I would also add in Elijah Muhammad, and I would say that Baldwin bore witness to their method, was the spiritual reawakening of, man. And, Joe talked about it. But also, we've been discussing this, when we talk about the Black Gods, or we talk about, for the longest time, the Nation of Islam. But what was, so yeah, I really wanted to thank, Joe specifically, but, also Shantanu about, there is this deep trauma, but this is what King overcame.
Yeah.
Even when this is what he, and I'll use this language, even though it was not a period of high tension, he, as a revolutionary, came to Birmingham and, as Yamal would say, heightened the contradictions, made the division, this is what Paul Robeson would say, identify the enemy. Who is the enemy? It's not just Elon Musk or the ones in Forbes, but even, the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, and, but more so, it's not many people. If you read the Epstein files, it's not many people, and they all know each other. It's a small club. But the same thing is true of the revolutionaries. It's not many people. The last thing I wanted to say was, I can't recall, Frantz Fanon. Doc, you brought up Frantz Fanon and this question of, so psychologically, do we need to have violence to purify ourselves? But King and Gandhi, and it's not an abstract question. Well, okay, next time I have to tell someone about Gandhi, I know, nonviolence is more than just its state of being or relationship to the state or going to jail, because there is a lot of nonviolence, direct action. What is different about Gandhi and King, that they were able to heal these people more so than just heal individuals? Because you can look at we looked at some videos of King speaking to children in Philadelphia, students. I think you'd be interested in that.
Let's see.
Yeah, I'm sure you were there, and
I was there, but I
yeah.
wasn't.
but I wanna find out how specifically King was able to relate to those children. What was he thinking about that made him relate to those children? What did they accept? And again, it's specific to that time. But then, how did he create a movement out of that? How did he create a movement of rooted in love, that overturned the hate, and unified the people?
Because at that point, the white man had not snatched the black man's soul. That's the difference. He had our bodies, but he never souls. Now he's found a way to snatch both body and soul. And that's why I say it's because it was the mind, satanic.
Right.
You have to ask yourself, how does the world create a creature like a rock, like a thing, like an Elon Musk? That's the wicked question. How do you create a monster
I agree with you when you said the white.
in the flesh. It thinks the way he thinks.
Well, I agree
You
with
know
you
what I'm
when you
saying?
said the
And
white.
these are metaphysical questions we have to ask ourselves. How do you create these monsters? Why? How do you even think like this?
Well, I understood. I was moving my car, but I was listening to the live stream. But you called the white Christ Satan, satanic.
This is the one they manufactured.
It's the one they manufacture, and I agree with you because Satan is the deceiver. You know,
Yeah.
that's all I'm saying.
Oh, Jim.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, we also wanted to read comments, but I wanted to respond. One thing that I appreciate about you, Joe, is that you have a very perceptive and acute understanding of the economic and material forces that are involved in all this, but also I appreciate that at the same time you have such a strong conviction and a spiritual conviction that's grounded in what you've experienced. And based off of what you were saying, part of where I feel like we do have common ground is that I think my politics or what I'm trying to do in my life is based on the assumption that people do have souls. And that because they have souls, that within every human being, there is that part of them, no matter how submerged it is, that one day will respond to truth. And I think that some people will respond earlier than others, but I think my whole life theory is based on the idea that there is that inner voice of truth that speaks to every person, and it's because they have a soul. And I agree with you that in many ways, part of what we're confronted by is the spiritual violence that has been done to the people, along with the economic and material and social violence that has been done. And yeah, I guess part of my reflections about like this whole conversation is, yeah, like King was saying, King was never naive in thinking that everybody will struggle. King was like, even among Black people, there will be Black people who will never struggle. There will be Black people who will be passive. There will be some who will actively collaborate with the oppressor. And yet, what he was able to see was not in that section, but in the broader mass of the people, a capacity and this kind of inner wellspring of a determination to be free. And actually, I like what Simon brought up about the sword that heals, because it reminded me of this other passage in that second chapter in Why We Can't Wait, where he says, nonviolence had a tremendous psychological importance to the Negro. He had to win and to vindicate his dignity in order to merit and enjoy his self-esteem. And he continues saying that this method of nonviolence was grasped by the Negro masses because it embodied the dignity of struggle, of moral conviction, and of self-sacrifice. And then this is the part that I wanted to read, which was that King says, I am convinced that the courage and discipline with which Negro thousands accepted nonviolence healed the internal wounds of Negro millions who did not themselves march in the streets or sit in the jails of the South. One need not participate directly in order to be involved. For Negroes all over this nation to identify with the movement, to have pride in those who were the principals, and to give moral, financial, or spiritual support were to restore to them some of the pride and honor which had been stripped from them over the centuries. And I think that that's part of the basis of hope and faith that like I have, which is that, yeah, not everyone will be involved. And yet and I think the actual method of struggle, I think for this time still has yet to be in some ways tested and discovered. But I think for me, what King is talking about, that critical moment in this country's history when that force that King represented was brought into history, that for me, I think makes the most sense as the starting point, the basis upon which we can build anything. But yeah, I don't know. I was just reflecting on like the larger conversation, and I think like as metaphysical as it may sound, and this is also even responding to Emily, like on this question of morality, like there are many, and even the concept of God, like Joe talked about, like every idea, every word in many ways has been corrupted by society, whether it's morality, God, Christ, freedom, the idea of freedom itself, the idea of democracy, which doesn't mean that we have to abandon any of those concepts. It's just that it does mean that we have to attack the white supremacist perversion of them, but there is still something to be fought for. And like I was saying, part of my assumption is that buried beneath all of the filth that has been heaped on the people by the elite, there is still a soul inside each person that does respond to truth. And I think it's just a question of how can we arrive at a common understanding and method of being able to speak to that at a basic level. Because, yeah, and I guess that brings us to some of the comments, which there are a lot of, and we can't read all of them.
Yeah, some of the early stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just summarize them. Yeah, there's a lot of comments. I think some of the later ones we should read, but just know that the earlier comments kind of go along with some of what Joe ended up bringing up. Although Joe brought it up after the comments, and Joe was not reading the comments unless you were reading the comments. But actually, there was a lot of conversation around the state of the Black church. And I think it goes around what Joe, even in your life history, what you were saying about is some of it's not even about the actual text, the sacred text, but it's about the way it's been taught or corrupted, not just by the white church, but even the Black church today. So people were having a debate of, is the Black church basically redeemable at this point? Is it worth anything? Even what Joe is bringing up about, like, I think it's a Howard Thurman move that in a country, but you could argue a world system that is defined by white supremacy, there's inherently two Jesuses, the white Jesus of the oppressor or Jesus of the oppressed.
Yeah.
And which kind of goes along with what you were saying, Doc and Jeremiah, that actually this is a time of self-definition, including self-definition of Jesus, self-definition of freedom. It is a time of self-definition. But people were, so Brother Gregory hopped in, again, what Joe was framing through your own autobiography about, like, how you were like, when Malcolm X was like, was basically like, you can't just adopt the religion of the oppressor. And then you were like, oh, that makes sense. And then you, for a while, were thinking about Islam. Brother Gregory from the Nation of Islam had this full comment where he says, bringing up the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, says, peace and blessings, Saturday Free School family. I'm tuned in to this discussion for the last hour, so he had listened to the first hour. I hope that I am not off topic, but my reflection guided me to share the following words from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad from a message he delivered for Birmingham, Alabama. I just love this statement, quote, "No master of anything can accept an unequal as his equal. This law of nature is divinely respected. If they," meaning Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers, "would accept the right way, which is the belief in Allah as God and Islam as a religion, and demand a place on this earth for our 20 million or more people that they can call their own, I would demand that every one of my followers join forces in a minute." And this is from Message to the Black Man in America, page 217. I love and respect your discussion on understanding King and so much more with the Civil Rights Movement. And I find that to be an interesting comment, or even what Joe is bringing up about like your story, your personal story of coming back to Christianity, but it's not white Christianity. It's not even the Christianity of like the current Black church totally, but it's like basically the Jesus of the oppressed, or like what Howard Thurman called Jesus of the disinherited, the real Jesus. And it relates to Brother Gregory's comment because actually the Black Gods group has been doing sociology of the black gods in Metropolis, like Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam, the United Sweet Daddy Grace, United House of Prayer for All People, Prophet Cherry of Philadelphia, and then also Father Divine and his Peace Mission. Our article is basically making the point, which is like they were dissatisfied with even the Black church at that time, and not just theologically, but their explanation for why Black people are still not free, despite there being emancipation. And now you're in the North even, and you have jobs, but why is it that you're still in this cage of unfreedom? And the creation of these new Black gods, not new gods, but Black gods of the Black poor. We're gonna talk about that and explain it. And like what you were saying, Joe, just really resonated with some of the discoveries and formulations we've been making. And we think that it has a lot of relevance for today because what we're seeing in the US of A or whatever, is not just a political crisis, but it's basically a crisis of gods. It's a crisis of gods of greed, avarice, individualism, like even what you were saying about sex dolls, like that type of dehumanization, isolation, psychological perversion, self-hatred. And then but then at the same time, what will a society that worships new gods look like?
Yeah.
And they must come from a source that does not emulate white men and women or white gods, but it's going to have to come from something more similar to these Black gods in the metropolis. But anyways, my whole point is that we're writing this report, and like I can't wait to share it with you, Joe, because I'd really like to have a conversation with you about it.
You have to go through my wife. She's the gate.
Okay, yeah. I'll get Rhonda's number so we can share it with you. Yeah, we should like we should get together and discuss. As it should.
Once we get into over philosophy, history, shits.
And we do fight.
We fight.
I believe it.
What? You're not talking to me. You're wrong. Joe, you're absolutely wrong. This is why you're wrong. That's not what Martin Luther King was trying to say.
It's not like a specific comment, but I think there's also discussion about basically if American society has increasingly become dominated by a technocratic elite, then should the solution to that be an alternative technocratic solution? And I think basically I disagree with that. I just want to say that in part because I feel like it's easy to underestimate the extent to which even during the 50s and 60s, that was literally like the technological takeoff point for American industrial technological society. And that was in large part what King was even responding to when he would talk about guided missiles and misguided men. And so, yes, the pace of the infiltration of technology, especially in terms of manipulating the psychology and cognitive ability and the moral quality of the people, has accelerated. I think that does not, I feel like that itself is not a new phenomenon in that sense. And I think that that's why it's not outdated to refer back to a Martin Luther King. And in many ways, that's why we see King as almost like futuristic in that sense. Able to speak to this moment in ways that few other figures in both the present and the past have been able to speak to. But yeah, I just wanted to say that.
There was one question for you, Doc, when you were talking about Mearsheimer and other voices, people. Lao Tzu 2110. Question for the doctor: what are your thoughts on John Mearsheimer's assessment that China is the enemy of the U.S. and must be contained?
Well, I don't agree with Mearsheimer. I agree with him about many things, but that, this game theory, large power calculation, I do not agree with.
Okay. And then David Ball says a revolutionary. Like, actually, the comments are really good because it goes into, I think people took really seriously the topic about what are the moral and political responsibilities of revolutionaries in the 250th in the U.S. And David Ball says A revolutionary recognizes the object of love themselves. Therefore, their power of empathy is unlimited. That's why they opt for peaceful solutions first. You must earn the right to go beyond this. Armed struggle to take the lives. You must do everything in your power to save first. And then, okay, this is based on, I think, the conversation you brought to like a head, Joe, which is Lao Tzu 2110 asks, question, was Jesus and his posse not European, question mark. And I think you would argue that actually Jesus was like what people call Palestinian, Middle Eastern, Afro-Asiatic. That's what you were saying. That everyone in the Bible was.
But that also historical Jesus was not European. But even what you were saying, as I understood, was that the second coming of Christ will be as a black man.
Well, what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say, if you read the Bible, you start in Genesis and you go through the Bible, it's quite evident that Jesus, you have to separate nationality and culture from race.
Right.
They're independent.
Right.
Based on our definition of what black is today, he was a black man.
Yeah.
Our definition today, if you got
I agree.
that much
The
black,
American
you black.
Yeah.
Okay?
I agree with that.
And that definition extends into Europe.
Yeah.
It extends into South America. Because if for example, Dominicans are, even though they're mixed, they're considered black. Okay. You go anywhere in the world, if you are mixed with black, you're black. Now we'll talk about the shades of blackness, which we use about that. Yeah, but you're black. So by the definition that the European world holds, let's look at Barack Obama. Barack Obama was elected as the first black president. Okay. Now it's interesting because the real intellectual debate here has had to do with, this is why I always go back to capitalism. The great question you have to ask yourself, they had to define black people if you had any black in you being black. Because if you were the product of a master-slave relationship and you were considered a dark-skinned white person, you would get all the privileges of being white. That means property ownership. That means civil rights laws. You would get all the laws of being white. So instead of making you a light-skinned, a dark-skinned white person, they made you a light-skinned black person. That way they deny you constitutionality. Okay, that was a very clever move, and that was about keeping assets within a certain context. Because the argument is, it's a logical argument. Was Barack Obama a dark-skinned white person or light-skinned black person? That's the real, but no, they confiscate our ability to think, and people are all of a sudden freaking stupid. Okay, if you have a dog, he's half German Shepherd and half Collie. He's neither both. And people say, what is it? He said, well, I got this, he got it. But for political and economic reasons, we're classified as black, which I'm happy to be. I'm not making an argument there's any issue with that. But I'm saying that the power system had a reason for that definition. Because if not, they will lose political and economic power. Yes, so you had to be classified. No matter how many children the master had, you were black.
There was a brief conversation in the comments about generation, baby boomers and Gen X, and whether there's hope for them, or like whether baby boomers and Gen X are better than the youth, or if the youth are better than the baby boomers and Gen X. And then people were commented a lot on the part of the conversation about, I think Joe and Doc, what you guys are bringing up and Eddie built on about the youth and their psychology and mentality today, what has changed, and what is going to be done, like what Joe was bringing up about soul, that the soul is gone. And then people were talking about the need for affirmation. So basically people were trying to tackle that question of youth and children a lot. Interestingly, when Doc earlier, you were talking about the moral maturation of youth, I was actually, it reminded me of the Cultural Revolution, the like good parts, I guess, in some ways, because like my parents are still to this day very much defined by when my father was sent to the countryside. Like no one was allowed to go to college unless you did a few years in the countryside. And the point of that was to morally mature, I consider it moral maturation of youth, where it's like you cannot separate yourself from the peasantry, the poor. So like my mother was sent to the factory, and then my father was sent to the countryside for 2 years. And like there are times where the peasants actually had to vote for which of the city kids did they want to go to college.
Oh,
So it's kind of interesting, whether you agree with it or not. Megna says, King's critique of Fanon is powerful. It is not violence that defines resistance to white supremacy, but the refusal to kill. Anti-colonial leaders believe that fighting for peace is true resistance to colonialism. It's so obvious from the non-aligned movement speeches like Nkrumah and Nehru. She says,
It's about Reconstruction.
oh yeah, where to go?
One thing, so there's a chapter in Black Reconstruction called the Transubstantiation of a Poor White. She says, one thing I learned from that chapter is that Andrew Johnson, the president, was the most anti-Confederate, yet he betrayed the Union because he was motivated by resentment, jealousy, rather than humanity. And so Du Bois was teaching that motivations and assumptions matter. Unless we challenge those hateful assumptions via a spiritual transformation, we will repeat the same cycles.
And then Boss Fight 7870 says, I'm sorry, but yeah, this is an unsubscribe for me. I think King's biggest flaw was his patriarchal Abrahamic leanings. No liberation if we keep perpetuating colonial Christianity.
Yahweh.
Yahweh is a storm war god. Rest in peace to all my ancestors who lived through me and who were either killed or colonized by Abrahamic religion. Look up Lapu Lapu.
We would say it's a different God. King worships a different God. It's not right.
That's the problem, is that the European never practiced Christianity. Because if he had practiced Christianity, he would have had no colonies. He would have had no slaves.
Right.
So he was never a Christian. And God, he spoke to me in that inner voice. He said, they were never Christian. Christianity was a label they used for the purposes. So that's how I fell in love with God. I fell in love with him. Because when I read him, how could I not love him?
Yeah, right.
He said, everybody is created in my image. And you're to love your neighbor as yourself. You want the best for your neighbor's daughter as you want for your daughter. You want to protect your neighbor's wife as much as you protect your wife. I mean, we talking about political philosophy.
Right.
That's deep. That's deep, man. He took me to a different rock. And then, like I said that time, I wouldn't share the gospel to white people. And God came and said, no, your problem is that you have hatred in your heart. And you can't love me and serve me with hatred in your heart. Those who are created by image. No matter. As a collective. Yes, I don't believe in collective guilt. I do when it comes to reparations, but I don't when it comes to judging the individual. The individual stands on.
I believe in collective responsibility.
Collective responsibility, but not.
But there were so many more comments, but we're running out of time. But it was such an engaging comment section, and Jeremiah and I, as the two people watching the comments, we really were so engaged by your comments and enjoyed looking at them, although we couldn't read all of them. So we hope that you keep commenting every week. I think we're gonna end here because Joe has to go to Roots picnic, and I want to make sure he gets there on time.
My wife's singing.
So we hope you let us know how Jay-Z is. Yeah. So okay, we're gonna end here, and we'll be back next Saturday, hopefully even with more updates about our July 4th event. So thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you again soon.